All right, hi everyone. Just wanted to say a quick note before I start the video. And yes, unfortunately, this is me trying to stall because I've been working on this premiere for the last month, and editing is happening up to a few hours ago. And the process was very lengthy, and it's actually still transferring to my computer right now, but it has just about 2 minutes left. And I just wanted to say a few things before I started to play it.
All right,
Hopefully,
hi everyone.
this works. It's not something I've done before, and if it doesn't work, I apologize that the live showing of it wasn't perfect, but it will be available to watch at any point, at your leisure, because especially because it is very long. If you haven't seen the comment posted on Facebook, the show is just about 2.5 hours long. Again, that probably seems ridiculous, but it's a 4-year career that Chad had at Wilson, and we looked at every single game and talked about a lot of aspects, including specific plays, specific players, the lead up to playing high school football at Wilson, and his decisions right before senior year concerning Michigan. And, we talked about a lot. And we recorded for close to 3 hours, and editing cut it down to just under 2.5. But there's a lot to take in. There's videos from every single game of his career, including great field level highlights collected from the Sight and Sound highlight videos that were done during the Contafio years by the late John Dallas, Jeff Steinhauer, and commissioned by the mothers organization, the parents organization, the boosters. And they play a huge role in this video, including the game film that I've converted from VHS to DVD and to digital. And we're gonna get the show rolling here. At about 30 seconds, the file's ready to go. So I just want to quick thank Justin Raphael for helping me with the introduction, and to the Henne family, obviously Chad and his wife and kids for their patience, allowing Chad to spend so much time with me, and especially to his parents, Sue and Sheldon, for giving me some vital photography and video as well. And I hope everyone enjoys the video. It's the first in the series. I'm hoping to sit down with a lot more people over the coming years and share their Wilson football story. So I'm going to sign off here now and get the video rolling. So I hope everyone enjoys, and just sit tight. It's about to begin.
No huddles. What? I'll call the plays from the line. Defense will never know what hit them. All right, let's go. Come on, break it down. Let's go. 3, 1, 2, 3.
In 1945, football came to Wilson High School. The program now has over 70 years of rich history filled with individual legacies. From Gursky to Dobbs, Ritz to Reynoso, and countless in between, each forged their own path and added to a growing tradition. You're about to hear their experiences and memories. This is my Wilson football story.
I'm Chad Henne. This is my Wilson football story.
When did you first start playing football? When did football become something that you were really dedicated to?
Yeah, I started early. I had older cousins. My dad was actually high school head coach at Harrisburg High School at the time, and I think I started around 5 years old. So my dad put me in pads. I think my uncles were the coaches in Hamburg School District, so they allowed me at a young age to go out there, and obviously I was bigger than a lot of kids at my age, so they allowed me to play up.
So you mentioned being part of the Hamburg School District. It's most of the people that know football in Pennsylvania, especially Berks County, Wilson football, they know that you didn't start at Wilson as a kindergartner, but it was pretty early that you moved into Wilson, wasn't it? It wasn't, I know for a fact, but the people I know listening and others in Berks County, they're not sure when you moved to Wilson, and apparently that's a big deal. So why don't you clear up from the person who would know best? When did you move to Wilson?
Yeah, I moved to Wilson in 3rd grade. Started my elementary school at Berkshire Heights. I think that was the last year Berkshire Heights. Spring Ridge was just being built. So 1 year at Berkshire Heights, and then went to Spring Ridge. So 3rd grade was when I moved into the school district.
Okay, so when you moved to Wilson, you would have been out of the, obviously the Hamburg Little League or whatever they called it, the Pop Warner type stuff. And when did you join up with Van Reed? When did you start playing for the Van Reed Vanguards, as they were known when you played?
Yeah, I started, I think it was still Mighty Mites in 3rd grade. I might have played 1 year of Mighty Mites, and then the next year would have been Mites. So 3rd grade, so that's probably, 9-10 years old.
And, obviously when you're really young and Mighty Mites and kind of just get tossed into wherever you fit, especially depending on your size, they might put you at different positions. But as you moved up to, Mites and then Midgets, where were you playing for Van Reed? What positions were you playing?
Yeah, for the most part, I remember distinctly coming into the school district, and they gave me a 54 jersey because I knew a big kid was coming in. And I looked at my dad, and I was like, 54? I was like, I'm not 54. I was like, give me that 34. I'm a running back. I played running back, and I played linebacker. So definitely didn't want 54, but most of my positions growing up were running back and linebacker.
Well, when you're at the size you were, at the grade you were in, that's kind of was the natural position for those, the young volunteer coaches are just like, that's a big guy, let's give him the ball and let him see what he can do. But now as you moved up, I think if I recall, it wasn't so much running back anymore, but you went to a fullback role. But you played a lot of defense too. They kind of moved around there. Safety, linebacker, kind of hybrid position there. But what about your experiences at Van Reed with the coaches? Did you have Seppi Winkler? Was he your Mites coach?
Seppi Winkler was my Mites coach coming in. He was probably my first or second year. Really enjoyed him. I thought he was a great person. Actually got to meet up with him years down the road. But obviously he was a great player at Wilson as well. Went on to Harvard. And then other coaches that I moved on to were Carl Dragonet, Coach Kirkpatrick. So those guys were my midgets coaches. But they all had a big role in why I liked football and kept coming back, and thought they were great coaches at the time and really pushed me and got the best out of me. So
after your time at Van Reed, played there, probably at least 3, 4, maybe even 5 years with Van Reed. Or back then when we wore orange, it wasn't the way it is now where Van Reed Bulldogs, Lincoln Park Bulldogs. It was Lincoln Park and Van Reed Vanguards wearing orange jerseys. It was quite something. I remember when I was playing growing up, I was like, where's the red and white? What is this orange stuff? It was, yeah, Lincoln Park and Van Reed. That was the big rivalry. And that would continue as we went into junior high. And now, did you play 2 years for Central Junior High?
Yeah, 2 years, 7th and 8th grade.
7th and 8th grade. So you got to play with Coach Anton Fernsler. Back then, with limited coaching staff. I believe there was only him and one, maybe 2 others at the time. Mr. Rhodes, I know, was coaching. So did your position change for your junior high year, 7th and 8th grade, or were you still mostly focused on fullback and some defensive aspects?
Yeah, mostly fullback, and I think I was more like a rush end at the time in junior high. So still in the mix of a lot of things. I guess I was just a hard-nosed, just ground and pound fullback, and then just love to hit kids at the defensive side of the ball. So they just try to put me at a point of attack.
Let's fast forward to your 8th grade year, your second year at Central Junior High. It was a pretty solid team there that year. And we were now in, this would have been the fall of 1999. And at the high school, Wilson, it was directed by, at the time, second-year head coach Jim Contafio. At what point during your 8th grade season at Central did anyone contact you or talk to you about switching positions and maybe playing quarterback? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think kind of just moving up to go to 9th grade. Summer was still around, and he always would come down sometimes, watch our practices, and obviously Contafio would take a peek if he could, if he had a chance from the high school practices. But Slimmer always, talked to my dad and said, he's a pretty big kid, see some talent in him, and he would communicate with Contafio. And really, I mean, I was just playing fullback and outside linebacker, rush end, and it was just until when we played the rival Southern Junior High, the last game of the year, that Contafio was at the game, and we threw like a fullback or one back, halfback pass, and I think it was to like Geosits, and I remember getting the pass or getting the toss. And then, hucking, I think I had like 35, 40 yards, and Geosits caught it for a touchdown. And I think Contafio, it caught his eye.
It was a light bulb.
Yeah, went off, and then I think it was I don't think it was the next day, but it was within a week where Contafio had me come up to the gym. Ian Firestone was up and coming, kind of like he was a receiver, quarterback kind of guy that was going to be the next guy up there. But he had me throw with him, and then he said, all right, next year you're going to bump up. And we're going to move you up to the high school, and we're going to see if you can play quarterback. So that was the time where I switched over and, kind of ran with it from there.
So it was just that quick, like it switched. I mean, did they ever ask you, do you want to play quarterback? Was that kind of, or was it just like you're playing quarterback?
Yeah, I don't think it was ever an option. I think my dad probably had more of a say than I did, but my dad was like, oh, quarterback? I was like, and then I remember distinctly him saying to Contafio, does he still get to play defense? And Contafio was like, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
So,
no,
he's probably
not going to happen.
We'll just please my dad, but. So started working quarterback drills that whole off season, going into ninth grade, and getting to move on there.
So that was the spark for the transition, which is kind of like a one-off, a halfback pass in a junior high game, and the high school coach happened to see it, catch wind of it, and be like, that's someone we need to work with. Well, I mean, you have the prototypical size. That was the thing that you had going for it. And Contafio is known for being a quarterback guru. So he essentially was like, I'll work with him. And obviously, spoiler, I think people watching this know, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
It's not, okay, it did, it's a pretty fine. You're going to be entering your, 12th year in the NFL this fall. So, yeah, I think the trial definitely worked out in your favor. And we're going to talk about a lot of the people that you just mentioned, Coach Contafio, Ian Firestone. Now, at the time when this would have been happening, when we would have been finishing, the junior high year in the fall of '99, Contafio and the Wilson High School team was going on one of the best seasons in history, that 1999 squad with Pete Gilmore, and the quarterback was Tony Cipolla. Did Contafio have you meet with Tony at all? Did you talk with Tony while they were in season or after the season about expectations? Did you get to see him throw? Did he guide you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, Tony was classmates with my sister, and somehow, I don't know how somehow they're family oriented between Tony and myself, distant cousins or somehow, I don't know, but I know one of our family members are related, and so we've known Tony for a while. I don't think he ever guided me, but he always just said, be your best and, good luck with everything. But Tony at the time, like you said, had a great year. They're going on to districts. I think they won the district final that year and then went on to states. I remember going to a couple of games at Hershey. But, yeah, so it was just they had a great platform there. Obviously, Contafio being in the second year there, developing quarterbacks and getting Wilson back on the right track again.
Yeah, Tony Cipolla was a 2-year starter, and he guided that Wilson team to, I think it was a 12-1 record, blew through Section 2 of the Lancaster Lebanon League. Obviously Pete Gilmore was a big part of that, and they played back-to-back games at Hershey, playing the district championship in Cumberland Valley, which they absolutely destroyed Cumberland Valley, and then played Bethlehem Catholic the next week, which was the end of the season, unfortunately. But that was an incredible team, growing up, getting to watch those guys, especially right before I was going to go up there and play with them. It was cool to see. And Tony Cipolla, I believe, is still single season or career passer rating or completion percentage is at the top of the Wilson record book. So incredible 2-year starter. And I know a lot of people that you played with, maybe a couple years older than you, still, say that Tony Cipolla is an incredibly underrated quarterback in Wilson history. So at what point, so we talked about kind of the transition and when Contafio talked to you, when did you know for sure like this is happening? Was it immediate? Like you're being called to ninth grade because you're going to start to learn quarterback?
I think it was, he told me, all right, we're going to transition you. But then I think once the workouts began, we started working out at 7 a.m. in the morning. I would go up in 8th grade to the high school, work out with the high school guys, start throwing, do footwork drills. So at that point I was like, all right, life's changing. I got to, spend more time throwing the ball than running the ball, and still not sure about defensive side of the football, but It was fun. I mean, I think it was just learning something new. I always knew I could throw the ball. I was a pitcher in baseball, so I knew I had a decent arm, but just didn't understand all the work that had to go into it. Obviously, never called a play, so that was different aspect as well. But it was a good transition, and there was a lot of older veterans from the Wilson program that were on that team that had great leadership and kind of took me in with open arms.
Yeah, so you're in the middle of your 8th grade year preparing for, I call up as a 4-year player at Wilson, a very uncommon thing to begin with. And I think now we're just past maybe a handful of players that have ever started a game as a freshman. Actually, 2 recently, in Nate Keller and Troy Corson. But before that, I think it was 4 maybe, you chief among them, Ian Firestone as well. And did they bring you along slowly, or is it kind of like an avalanche where all of a sudden they're like, you need to come here to throw, you need to get into this lifting program, we need you to come to this session, we need you to watch these films, here are the plays you need to learn? Like, did that happen immediately, or did Coach Contafio, the offensive coaches, and some of the players, were they like, here's a little bit, or is it just like, nope, you're a big boy now, let's take care of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was set in stone. I think it was like, all right, let's start learning the plays. This is this route, this is that. So we really dove into it pretty fast. But I think it was just basically getting the mechanics down, just because I'd never played quarterback before, and getting the footwork down, different plays and stuff, and just kind of getting accustomed to everybody out there, throwing the football to receivers, running backs, tight ends. So that was just a different part of me. And obviously you don't have pads on, so it's just shorts and T-shirts, and just kind of getting to know everybody and move along with the weight program as well.
At this point, Ian Firestone was a sophomore, but when you would get up to play with him, he would be entering his junior year. He had already had 2 great years for the Wilson High School team, electric returner, great receiver and defender. But because of the graduation of Sapolo, no real possibility of someone coming up behind, at least in the junior or sophomore classes, that kind of what negated them to bring you up. Now, it seemed, at least on the outside, that there was a good chance that Ian would be playing quarterback your freshman year, his junior year of the fall of 2000. What was the dynamic with Ian, them bringing you up? Was he open to that? Did he want to stay at receiver? Did he want to play quarterback? How did that work when you and Ian kind of started these off-season quarterback drills?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just split reps. He probably took more than I took at the time, just because he was experienced. And I honestly think Contafio wanted Ian to emerge and be that starting quarterback. But I think he realized that we needed him outside a wide receiver, could really help us out in that standpoint. And if this young kid and myself could kind of take over and supply, movement on the offense, then why not go with the young guy and keep another guy outside where we can create mismatches as well. So I think we split most of the reps. There was a lot of 7-on-7s that took part throughout the summers, and even leading up to the first game in Harrisburg. I think Ian played the first half, or we split quarters somehow, and then I finished out the game. But Contafio had a plan, but I'm not sure where he was thinking. I just knew, all right, well, I'll just have an opportunity and see what I can do. But we knew Ian was definitely versatile in playing different positions.
So you get through, the winter of your 8th grade year into the spring. The high school runs spring practices for the incoming sophomores and you, and then you transition to summer, and now it's football full time. If it hadn't felt like that already, now it's football full time. You have their voluntary practices, which you're expected to be at, and 3 days a week, other sessions, films. Then you go to team camp and things like that. At what point did it start to seem like there was a real possibility that you could be the guy as a freshman?
I think it was just going into those 7-on-7s, being at team camp, just seeing myself progress. I wouldn't say it was very fast, but it was just slow progress, where it was just making the routine plays out there routine, and just learning the offense and picking up quickly. There wasn't a lot of verbiage for Contafio's offense, and a lot of it was he wanted to be no huddle, so it was kind of easy to pick up. But I think it was just keep consistently playing at a high level and playing well, that he saw that we could have a chance with this, and obviously have some guys outside to help Chad move the ball down the field.
So end of the summer, we're in the last week of August, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this. Did you start the Harrisburg game, that first week game? Were you on first offensive possession? Were you the quarterback?
No, I think
It was
Ian
Ian?
started the game.
Okay.
Yeah. I think he took over the first quarter. And then
I
think
couldn't
it was
remember. I mean, I remember you playing and finishing the game. I just couldn't remember if you started that first snap. You were the guy. I couldn't recall, and unfortunately, my research turned up nothing. But figure you probably remembered. But I remember in that week leading up to it, that first game against Harrisburg, which was sort of started on September 1st, 2000. Talking to my family and being like, "Well, Chad's going to play quarterback," and they just kind of looked at me. I was like, "He's a freshman." I was like, I know he's a freshman, but he's going to play quarterback Friday night. They didn't believe me because Wilson didn't play freshman. Like, that was unheard of. Even with the success of the program, back to Gursky through Slemmer and now to Cantafio, freshmen barely had any impact, and especially on the most important position on the field. So literally no one believed me. Even though I was on the team, no one thought, they thought I was lying. And, then we finally get to that first game, and, well, I wasn't lying, obviously. And you got to play a lot. As you said, you got to finish the game. But that first game, I don't think exactly went off, as expected. You're thinking this big, Friday night football game in Pennsylvania. It's pretty big deal. And then Mother Nature decides she wants to step in. So that first game against Harrisburg was actually finished on Saturday the 2nd in heat. I think we started at like 10 a.m. or something like that. It was a very weird experience, especially for us experiencing the first ever high school game of our careers. It would be a Wilson victory. Wilson would beat Harrisburg 21-18, but it was a tough game. Harrisburg led on 3 different occasions. You had some Wilson players suffering from heat exhaustion. I believe star tight end Andy Rowland missed maybe the fourth quarter with some with heat-related issues, but we got big games from Ryan Schrader on the ground and Drew Kendall as well. And tell me about what you were thinking Friday night, getting ready to step on the field, and then when you got your number called. Was there a lot of nervousness there? Did you feel prepared? What was going through your head as you're getting ready to step on the field as a freshman?
Yeah, I think any game that you play in, and drawing back to that, you're always nervous, I think. But once you get on the field, I think everything goes away and you get a play underneath your belt. Then you just really rely on your preparation and what the coaches have done that week during practice to just carry over in the games. But, there's obviously a lot of nerves going on. First experience as a high school football player at a different position. And just looking at guys that are 4 years older than you at most times in the offensive line and outside, and you're trying to tell them what to do, and they're like, "Does this guy really know what he's doing, or is he going to guide us in the right direction or not?" So I think that was more to overcome than anything than just playing. It was just trying to get their respect and hopefully play well for them. But after, like I said, a couple plays go in, then you just, lose all thought of that and just go play football.
How was it? And now you mentioned the relationship you had with Ian Firestone and the other quarterbacks working out, and probably the receivers too. They probably came around pretty quickly. But what was it like talking to maybe the defenders or the linemen before they really got to see you interact in camp? The 7-on-7, you don't get to interact with the linemen. They're off doing something else. How was it as, at this point, what are you, like 14? 14 or 15, and you're telling kids that are close to turning 18 what, like you mentioned, what to do. Did everyone get on board immediately because, hey, Coach Cantafio says this is the guy, we're going to listen? Or was there a moment where you had to say, I'm in charge here, this is what we're going to do?
Yeah, I think it took a couple games. I don't think it was, right off the bat that they're looking at me like, oh man, this guy's going to lead us to, districts or states or anything. But, once, I started to prove myself throughout the year, and after the first 3 or 4 games, then really just kind of bit on okay, this guy, can play and help us out. But then we started, camaraderie and, great relationships that they respected me, I respected them. So it all worked out. But obviously Cantafio and the coaching staff was a big help as well.
The senior leadership and your upperclassmen players probably would have been more open to it if they were part of a losing program and looking for a spark. But you're talking about a team that was 12-1, destroyed teams in the district championship, one of the best teams in Wilson history, a top 10 team all time. And then a lot of guys coming back, and now they get a look at a freshman quarterback. I'm sure they're thinking, we've got to be able to do better than this, right? And that's not even a knock on you, because anyone that's a 12th grader looking down at a freshman, how can he help us? That's kind of what they're thinking. But the best way to cure that is to win. You beat Harrisburg. Everyone's happy about that. Then in week 2, I believe, is that your first start? Week 2 against up at Stroudsburg. That was a bus drive to get up to that game, and things weren't exactly going as hoped. It was a low scoring game. It seemed everyone was just kind of feeling each other out. Both teams couldn't get anything going. Wilson would end up winning 12-7, another real close game. And of course, the paper's talking about Wilson's struggles. They couldn't beat Harrisburg convincingly. Now, obviously, a tough team, very athletic. But now you play a Stroudsburg team that not many people are familiar with, and coming out by a 5-point victory isn't anything to write home about. Especially it took Stroudsburg mistakes to seal the win. But you get some meaningful time at quarterback with 26 attempts, thrown for over 200 yards. You get a couple touchdowns to Ian Firestone and Nick Lambros. A big one to Nick as well was the second one was a 42-yard touchdown. Nick was able to take down the sideline for a score. But it was yet another come-from-behind win. In your second game, your first start, both of them, you helped orchestrate Wilson victories. And that had to bring the seniors on board. Well, maybe it wasn't pretty, everyone's collective game, but a win is a win. It doesn't matter the scores. You come back home, you get to Gursky Stadium to take on Boyertown. And again, it's another close victory, 14-6. Third straight game that Wilson's losing at halftime. It's somewhat unheard of, especially coming off of the 99 season. What were Coach Cantafio's pregame and halftime talks like? How intense was he to fire up the team?
I mean, he's always intense. I mean, especially the younger I was. I mean, I think the older I got, he kind of controlled himself a little bit. But, I mean, pregame speeches, I remember, Mike Nelson sitting there, and he got up the one time and, hit Mike Nelson in the chest to get him going and rowdy. And I was like, man, if Mike gets pissed off, he's going to throw Cantafio across the freaking room. I was like, what is he doing? What is he thinking like that? I don't know. I mean, that's just the way he was. He was very enthusiastic. He got the players going. Guys believed in him and, loved him as a coach. I mean, there's always things that you disagree on, but, he was a great coach for us. We trusted him, and, the way he got everybody motivated, I think, got us going and, got us in the right direction, pumped up for the games.
So despite the struggles early on, you're getting the victories, 3-0 on the season. League plays or non-league plays over. Now you're going to start league play, and Wilson has to go to Cedar Crest. And they were a team that kind of hit their peak in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that helps when you have Brandon Kirsch and Jaron Hayes on the team. Two eventual D1 players, big-name guys that were only juniors. And they had a strong team. Wilson had to go to Cedar Crest, and Wilson would suffer their first loss, your first loss as a starting quarterback. But it was an interesting game. Wilson only lost 20-13. What was it like after the fact, being around players that know their time on the field is limited, and any time you suffer a loss, you're thinking about those upperclassmen, those guys who may not get to go on. What was the feeling around the team after the loss to Cedar Crest, which was 20-13 on September 22nd?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you take a loss, you look back and kind of criticize what you could obviously do better. But I think as a whole, in high school, one loss, whether it's a big deal or not, you still had plenty of opportunities, and luckily it was week 4, so. Played 10 games in a year. You still have 6 more games left, and obviously it was a division game, which could hurt us in the districts. But in the end, I think again, point back to our senior leadership that had done a great job, kind of rallying us back. Get us back on the practice field and kind of getting us set straight for the next week upcoming. But all due to that leadership, Cantafio, the coaching staff. Just get us back on the same page and, keep fighting next week.
And the next week was back home, but against J.P. McCaskey. Also, not a team missing talent. They were very, very talented. I know sometimes people listening probably are thinking Cedar Crest, McCaskey, because the last 10 years, those teams have not been strong programs. But back when you were playing, those were two of the preeminent teams. Cedar Crest, I mentioned Brandon Kirsch and Jaron Hayes, but McCaskey had someone by the name of Perry Patterson, and also a contingent of skill positions in Dan Melendez, who went to Maryland, Nequan Lee, Brandon Way, and James Brooks. So they were stacked, and most of them were underclassmen, including Perry Patterson, who would go on to Syracuse. So you come back to Gursky, take on McCaskey, and leading up to the game, actually there was some chirping going on, or maybe some just thinking out loud from McCaskey head coach Scott Feldman. I don't know if you remember this or not, but he actually questioned the Wilson offense. So, it's kind of subtext saying they're led by a freshman quarterback. How much can they really do? And looking back at the first 4 games, the offense wasn't putting up a lot of numbers. So, he has statistics to back it up. But do you remember that being put in the paper and people talking about leading up to that McCaskey game, what Coach Feldman said about the offense?
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, rightfully so. He had ammunition to go against. As an offense, we did struggle. I was still in that learning phase where the offense hasn't taken over a game, and our defense has really just been pulling us out, especially the first 3 games. But I think as an offense, we kind of took that into, in our mindset and saying, okay, well, now somebody has challenged us. What can we do? And, again, we put in a great game plan. We knew they had talent as well on McCaskey, but we have talent as well. So it would be a great matchup. And, I think, we came back and we won that game. And our offense actually showed some power that we could run the ball and also throw the ball.
Yeah, so Wilson got the first lead at halftime. First in the first 5 weeks of the season, that was the first lead at halftime. It was a back-and-forth game. Wilson came out on top, 28-26. It wasn't without drama. Wilson's trying to run out the clock, and there was a fumbled snap near the end of the game. And what happens when a quarterback center misfires on the exchange? There's a couple things that can go on. Very little people listening to the show know what happened. So what happens on the snap that could go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, there's different things. I always, as a quarterback, I feel like it's my job to get the football at all times and, don't place blame on anybody else. But, the center could be short, so either shorts arms it and you don't get it fully and doesn't hit your hand firmly, or the quarterback could pull out quicker than expected. The cadence or the snaps off, just not on the time on your cadence. But there's numerous reasons why, but as a quarterback, I always feel like, if it hits your hands or it's right there, the quarterback should be able to get the football.
Kind of what most of the coaches remember yelling at the receivers playing, if the ball hits your hands, you better catch it.
Right, correct.
After the fumbles exchange there, we had a long McCaskey pass and attempted a 40-yard field goal that would have won the game. Obviously, since Wilson won 28-26, we know that wasn't good. You were 8 of 14 for 106 yards and a touchdown in the Wilson victory, a bounce back from the loss to Cedar Crest. And now the team's 4-1. You're halfway through the year, and because of that victory, you know that you control your destiny to the district playoffs. Now, there's a couple games here in a row where things really started to click. Week 6, Wilson hosts Hempfield on October 6th, winning 44-20. This was the first dominating win of the Wilson season of your career, and this seemed to be a breakout game for you. There was a lot of quotes about your confidence and comfort, and the statistic backed it up. 16 of 20, 248 yards, 3 touchdowns, and you also got your first rushing touchdown, I believe, in this game as well. What was it like to feel the dominance out on the field, part of the team effort and your individual performance? At this point, you're sure you were confident in yourself. You knew you could do it, but did this serve as a reassurance?
Yeah, I think anytime you play a game like that, and obviously, it's not all due to yourself. Your teammates are helping you. Obviously, the offensive line's doing well. The receivers are catching the ball, running the football. But it was a good team effort, and, always one individual gets pointed out. But at the same time, as a young quarterback, you see something like that and you dominate. It does build a little bit more confidence in you, propelling you into the next coming weeks. But again, great leadership that keeps you level, keeps you humble, and you kind of don't get ahead of yourself. You want to match that the next week with your stats and upcoming games as well.
Now, at the time, you had set a new Wilson record of passing yards of 248 against Hempfield, which you would break multiple times over the next 4 years, would ultimately be broken by your understudy, Eric Hetrick, now holds the record of 359 yards against Manheim Township, one of many records that you set at Wilson, and we'll talk about throughout this show. But there was a specific touchdown in this game to Ian Firestone that just seemed to be, well, I'll let Coach Contafio sum it up. This is what he told the Reading Eagle. On your 56-yard touchdown pass to Ian, he said, just unbelievable. A freshman did that. How many freshmen can make a play like that? And you talked about Contafio's support, but when he's talking about it, not just to the team or to you, but to the general public, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it shows that he has confidence in me, and all the hard work that we have put in throughout the off season and training camp and all that stuff, I think really pays off. And obviously I knew I had the talent. It's just putting it on tape and doing it consistently. But again, due back to all the hard work that we put in, it shows up on Friday nights.
One of the stars of that Wilson team in 2000 was a returning multi-way player, kind of a jack of all trades, and probably maybe the best all-around player in every facet of his game was senior receiver, defensive back, and kicker Brett Harbach. He was an interesting guy because he wasn't the flashy Ian Firestone. He wasn't the huge Andy Rowland, but he was the guy that, I guess, in modern day and times playing in the NFL now, you're talking about someone like Julian Edelman or Wes Welker or Danny Amendola, someone like that. He was a guy the possession receiver, but someone that didn't drop the ball. If you got it to him, he caught it. Rowland, Firestone, Harbach, Lambros, those are the big guys that your first year. Did any one of those stand out, or do they all just kind of gel as a group? Your group of wide receivers all had different aspects to their game.
Yeah, I mean, I think they, like you said, they do have different aspects, and you kind of pick that out early on, what guy can do what, but I felt like Brett was always the most consistent. He was a guy that was always putting the work in. He was a team leader. Just seemed like any time a play broke down, he'd be the guy working with me or trying to get the ball to him. And, I just felt like he had a great head on his shoulders and, just very reliable. But, the other guys, I mean, Andy was, D1 guy, went to Duke, just a big target, kind of hard to miss him. And then, Ian Firestone obviously had, the most talent out of all of them. But, you could get the ball in his hands and he could turn it into a touchdown real quick. But I think altogether, Nick Lambros, I mean, not everybody's flashy, but when the ball gets in their hands, they can make something happen. And everybody, helped out that year. Great leadership between all of them and just made some really big plays throughout the year.
Brett Harbach said after the Hempfield win, "It seems like every game this year came down to the last few minutes. Tonight we showed how much we have gelled. Chad's a big part of that. As he has improved, so has the team." Week 7, Wilson travels to Millersville to take on Penn Manor. Another big victory, 30-7 over the Comments. You went 14 of 23 for 214 yards and a touchdown. And we touched on the different receivers. We mentioned 4 there, but that night you actually completed to 7 different guys, just showing the depth that Wilson had on that 2000 team. And Coach Contapio said after the game that Henne will be a great, great quarterback. He only gets better every week. He's done a great job for us. Now, league title hopes got some help from Reading's dramatic come-from-behind victory against Cedar Crest, who Wilson had previously lost to, which saw actually the Red Knights against Cedar Crest scored 21 points in the fourth quarter, but we'll talk about them in just a little bit. Before we get to the Wilson-Reading game, the Manheim Township game was in between back at Gursky, and again, it was another dominant performance, a shutout for the Wilson defense. Bulldogs winning 28-0, and you had a huge game, 21 of 33, 232 yards, 2 touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, and again, you set a school record that eventually you top for completions, and it was one of the big things during your time at Wilson, at least this first year, was the home winning streak, the home field advantage, playing at Gursky Stadium. This victory against Manheim Township was the 34th straight home victory for the Bulldogs. What do you have to say about the tradition of the Wilson football program? Were you aware of it as a kid growing up in the system, or did it kind of just pop to you when you got the call up to the high school team?
Yeah, I think anytime, even when I was in Van Reed and junior high, we always went to the Friday night games, always supported. My parents always took me there, and I just enjoyed watching it. But it was always a great atmosphere. I mean, we have probably one of the bigger stadiums in the area, and it's always packed, especially on the home side. And everybody's just, always cheering, always supportive, and, it was just a great atmosphere to play in, and, due to the fans, it increases your enthusiasm on the field, it helps you play better, and obviously when on the defensive side, crowd noise and everything, even in high school, can affect the game, but we always had great fans, always had great support, and, it's much appreciated.
So that Week 8 win over Manheim Township would actually be this team's last game on the Gursky Stadium turf, as Week 9 and 10 were road games, and then what would end up being a playoff berth was also played on the road. Week 9, people had been talking about it for a long time. Even after the Wilson lost to Cedar Crest, Wilson Reading was looming large on the schedule. And Reading's had their up and down times, but they had started to really peak under Al Walski, and this was turning out to be one of their better teams in their history. Coach Cantafio didn't want the Wilson team to talk about it, look ahead. It was always 1 week at a time, one game at a time, that coach speak, the cliches. But they really hammered that home in the weeks leading up to the Reading game. So much so that finally, after the Manheim Township victory, when they put a bow on that, they finally opened up and said, you know what's coming. It's that time. This is the game. Wilson's going to have to travel to Reading, play on Albright's campus, and that would take place on Friday, October 27th, 2000. Now, do you remember the feeling and the coverage leading up to this game? Did it feel bigger than anything you've been a part of at this point?
Yeah, I think so. And obviously, being just crosstown, rivals and, everybody hyping it up. I mean, just me being a part of it, I think it was just a learned atmosphere more than anything from the players, from the coaches, not being a part of a game like that. But I think going into it again, we just try to prepare on that week, bring in the game plan, best game plan that we could, and just try to go out and execute on Friday night.
Now, I mean, since we're looking back on this, over 15 years later, everyone knows that Wilson comes out on top. This is a victory, an unlikely one, but midway through the third quarter, Wilson's losing 25-6. It's not even much of a game at that point. Now, it was well played, hard fought, but Reading had the distinct advantage. They were up 19 points, basically not even 20 minutes away from the end of the game, and then there was just some whirlwind activity, just score after score in Wilson's favor. And it seems that looking back and reading over articles about the game, that this really, while the Hempfield game showed what you could do and confidence and whatnot, everyone seemed to point to your leadership and toughness during this game. And what was your experience on the field during that Reading game, during the epic comeback? Something that at the time was written, and I'm not sure has been topped yet, is said to be the greatest game in Berks County football history.
Yeah, I mean, anytime, 25-6, and then you come back and win, it's definitely exciting. But I think at the time, I was getting beat up. They were putting pressure on me, not allowing me to get outside the pocket or, stay on rhythm with the receivers in the passing game, and we really didn't do much in the first half. And it wasn't that, obviously we weren't scared, but it was like, man, these guys are pretty good. They were fast, they were physical, but we just had to change our mindset. We had to match that intensity. And I think at halftime, again, Coach Cantafio with a great speech saying, hey, let's not worry about it. Let's not just try to get ahead of ourselves, but let's just play one play at a time and see what we can do. And, we came out, on fire. And I think, again, a lot of great leadership on that team to get the guys going, get us in the right direction, and a lot of big plays were made in that second half.
Was this one of the hardest hitting games that you played in your 4 years at Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they had, the Bryan brothers, numerous other guys that, go on to play.
Lamar Stewart.
I mean, you had guys that were, Division I players. And, we had Division I players as well on our team, but they just matched our intensity just a little bit higher in the first half. But, the second half was a different story.
Cantafio said after the game, we've said it all along that Chad Henne is special, and I think he proved that tonight against a great football game. He's a great kid. He took some real shots tonight. Is there one that stands out, whether it was Sam or James or Lamar or just one of their defensive linemen at that point in your career? Was there a hit, a sack, or a rush that they met you that just was like, all right, this is a lot different than Central Junior High?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of runs that I remember trying to go on because I was never, taught to slide. So I was a running back for most of my career, or high school, or in junior high and everything. But so I was trying to run people over, which, they were a little bit, had more size on me at the time and were, putting some licks on me. But I remember after the game, I mean, I actually had a concussion because I got sick on the bus ride home. And then I actually had to go to doc afterwards, and then, big, thing at home where my parents had to wake me up every hour just because I was sick, and I fought through it, which probably wasn't the right thing to do at the time.
Yeah.
And now that you learn about concussions later on in your career, but turned out okay. I mean, it was just a mild concussion, but yeah, they were definitely hitting me, and we fought back.
Yeah, it's amazing what nearly 20 years can do to medical science and athletic training because Doc Moore is one of the best in the nation, and just to see his advocacy for head injuries and concussions and everything that coaches have to go through now. It's a big difference over the last 2 decades than it was in the late 90s, early 2000s. Besides when you mentioned mild concussion, they don't even give out, there is no mild concussion anymore. It's funny, they used to have all these different terms for it back when you were playing in high school, and that's completely different now. Things would have been very different if you would have came out of that Reading game.
Absolutely. I think, you definitely been pulled out. I don't think you would have been allowed in, especially, with the vision and stuff. But, technology now is way better than what it was, and obviously research helps as well. But, yeah, it was definitely a hard-fought game.
So Mike Drago said in his write-up after the game, he was a Scholastic sports editor for the Reading Eagle at the time, and he said the Bulldogs pulled off perhaps the greatest comeback in their storied history. You threw for 167 yards on 15 completions. You also had the 10 rushes for just 18 yards, but you got 2 rushing touchdowns that helped Wilson come back for that victory. But it was such a weird game, such a crazy game. In the final seconds of the second quarter, through the middle of the third, the game went from a 6-6 tie to 25-6 in favor of Reading, but there were 3 safeties, 2 of which went against Wilson. For a safety to happen in a game is usually a big deal. 3 of them happened in one game alone. It's just part of the the amazing thing that was that Wilson-Reading game from 2000, which, still, whenever I talk about, if I'm chronicling a season or a game or sitting down for the Bulldog Hour or something like this, and Wilson-Reading 2000 pops up, people's eyes just get real wide because they remember what they were doing if they were there watching it. Justin, my co-host in the Bulldog Hour, he was at that game. He still talks about it being one of the greatest high school games he's ever witnessed. My dad talks about watching it from the building next to Albright up in the suite there from a neighboring company, and just couldn't believe what was happening and how many people wanted to leave at halftime because just things weren't going Wilson's way. And then you have the after the game stuff with the band buses tires being slashed and all the interesting stuff that happens. But man, what a game, what an experience. And when you look back to that your freshman year, is that the main memory that pops back, or is there something else that's bigger?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, a big rivalry game, first kind of big game in my career. As a Wilson player, but very memorable. A lot of plays that I remember going back and forth, and then just the last drive. I can just picture me hitting Harbaugh and him springing free on big third down, and there's a lot of good things that happened in that game. But yeah, definitely one to remember.
And you have a tumultuous history with Reading, and we'll touch on games 2, 3, and 4 as we progress here. After the victory over Reading, Wilson had to regroup and go to Governor Mifflin. Rivalry game, huge deal. Wilson hadn't played them in a few years because of the flip-flop of sections, reigniting the rivalry at their place, but Wilson was able to come out on top, winning 28-7. You threw for 202 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Bulldogs improved to 9-1 and earn a spot in the district playoffs, which is always the goal at the beginning of the year. Everyone talked about wanting to defend the title, coming off that dominant 99 season, winning district gold, getting the chance to go back. Now, the way things are now, currently 8 teams make the field. For a while, 16 teams made the field, but when you played, it was only 4. So that loss to Cedar Crest wasn't the end of the line, but you knew to make the playoffs, you pretty much had to win out. And that's why that victory over Reading was so huge, and then finishing strong against Mifflin. So 9-1 on the season, you get to go to, I believe, number 1 seeded Cumberland Valley to open the D3 Quad A playoffs in the semifinals on November 10th. And that was a tough game. That was a windy game. It did not play into the offensive playbook that Coach Contafio wants to run. Wilson would lose 21-7. You were able to throw for 144 yards and a touchdown. And one thing that I didn't mention early going, obviously, you're a young quarterback learning the position, getting thrown to the fire as a freshman. The first few games, obviously there's going to be interceptions. And then you run up this 180 attempts, no interceptions. And that came into an end in this game. But what was it like each week during the season leading up to this game, getting so much better that you didn't even have to worry about turnovers anymore? Was it, just the relationship with the receivers? Was it learning the playbook? Did your vision improve? What was it that leads to those string of perfect performances?
I think it's just your familiarity of just the offense and know where to go with the football versus different coverages, and kind of just if the first guy's open in your read, you hit that first guy, don't pass it up. And I think early on you kind of second guess yourself a little bit, and you don't hit that first open guy, and then you think number 2 is going to be open, and he's not open, and then you just start making bad decisions. So I think it was just going through my progressions, hitting the first open guy that I saw, and just making it a lot easier on myself than anything. And obviously, experience helps as well. So being more comfortable out there as a quarterback, each game, it just it enlightens you. I mean, I think you just see everything better. You see different defenses. Sometimes it's all the same, so you can make those plays, and it just becomes routine plays.
So your freshman season ends with a 9-2 record, incredibly successful by most measurements. And at this point, had you been contacted by college coaches yet?
Yeah, so luckily enough, we mentioned earlier, we had a lot of seniors and even underclassmen that were being recruited Division I. So I think that helped out as well for me being recruited. Mail started turning up, being invited to different camps. We're all showing up at my doorstep, and it was all due just because Ian Firestone, Andy Rowland, Mike Nelson, those guys kept bringing in coaches, and they're like, well, we're watching this kid, but wait,
who's this guy?
So you kind of get recognized that way as well. But yeah, it started coming in. I got my first offer actually from LSU, which is strange. Jimbo Fisher, which everybody knows, Florida State. Now he's at Texas A&M. So that kind of opened my eyes. I was like, whoa. I was like, this is getting actually real now.
That's a big deal.
And it's not like it was just a small school. It was one of the major schools at the time. And Nick Saban was the head coach. Jimbo Fisher was the offensive coordinator. So got to meet those guys, and it was whirlwind at the beginning, but a lot of fun towards the end.
So I was going to actually ask you who was your first offer, and as soon as you mentioned LSU, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. Did you expect to get offers this early?
I don't think so. I mean, I think as a kid, especially even, you have success, 9-2 record as a freshman. I would say it wasn't all me. We had a lot of other guys out there that were making spectacular plays, but quarterback's always the guy that, gets the praise. But, at that age, being recruited, it's humbling, but at the same time, it's exciting to move on and see where things go in the next 3 years.
So you come back for your sophomore year. You're obviously the starting quarterback. There's no competition this time around. You're the guy, and now you're seen as a leader. You have a year under your belt. You're a full-time starter. You're a big name. People recognize you. Teammates look up to you. Did you have extremely high expectations for the team in 2001 because of the amount of players that were coming back? Now, there were a ton of losses, and you rattle off the names. Andy Rowland, huge loss. Brett Harbaugh, huge loss. Mike Nelson, big loss. And countless others. There were a ton of seniors on that team that had won a district medal the year before, had another 9-win season with you as a freshman. But there was a lot coming back in 2001. Were expectations very high?
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, a lot of guys coming back, but at the same time, it's our tradition. We're not going to take a back seat and say we're going to reload or just rebuild. We're going to reload, and I think that's what our mindset was, that we're going to go out and win another section title and try to go on the districts and move further on from that point. Yeah,
tradition and legacy is amazing, and at Wilson, it's no different. Sometimes it can feel like a sandbag or kind of like just a rope around your body pulling you down, because if you don't meet those expectations, occasionally it'll spiral out of control. And a little bit of that happened in 2001 after, so many strong years in the early Cantafia years, the end of the Slemmer years, great performances, multiple championships and the like. 2001 didn't exactly go as people expected. But it started off really well. Week one, again, Mother Nature kind of hung around your career. As we look through all four, there was always some kind of weather-related issue. Week one, Harrisburg, your freshman year, pushed to Saturday because of a lightning storm. Week one, sophomore year, same thing, kind of, except Owen J. Roberts decided, we're not going to finish. Which is amazing to me, because that game that started on August 31st, by I think just 4 minutes into the second quarter, they called it, and we waited around for an hour and a half, and Owen J. Roberts was like, nah, your game, we're done. Did you ever hear why that they decided not to want us to come back Saturday?
Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know if they just said, all right, this team's probably better than us anyway. Let's try to save our players for the rest of the year or not. But it's definitely unheard of unless they had something else going on Saturday during the football season that they couldn't have it on the field. But.
Yeah, it was never explained. I couldn't find it in the Red Eagle write-ups or anything, but it was something like 8 minutes left in the second quarter. So they only played about 16 minutes of the game. And Wilson was up 14-0. It was a sloppy early game, a lot of turnovers. You only had 11 pass attempts. You did get a touchdown in there, but they called the storm in the early second quarter. It was super weird. Do you remember as a player what your reaction was that we're not even going to get to play a full game in week one?
Yeah, I honestly thought it was embarrassing for just Owen J. Roberts. I mean, obviously it's not the players or maybe I don't know if it's coaches, but it's probably more the district itself. So it's more them to blame than anybody on the player. I'm sure the players wanted to play and come back and play us. Yeah,
because Wilson, like I said, up by 2 touchdowns, but it wasn't crisp, it wasn't easy, and that's to expect at the beginning of the year. We hear coaches always say that the first 2 or 3 weeks, those non-league games in high school football, especially, that's when you're trying to figure out who you are, what's your identity, what can and can't you do, and to only get to play not even a half. I know Coach Cantafio was not happy about it, but they're the home team. They got to decide, and the administration said no. Week 2 got to welcome Stroudsburg to Gursky now this time around. This one went a little bit better. Credit for the shutout in the first week because of the call game 14-0, but this was an earned shutout now for the Wilson defense, destroying Stroudsburg 35-0. Now, the biggest takeaway from this wasn't the dominance, but Coach Cantafio kind of dwelled on that once the team got out there and kind of blew off steam and got the big lead, the effort stopped. That was the big thing that he talked about. He didn't see a full game. He loved what he saw at the beginning because I think Wilson was up 28-0 at halftime and maybe even 21-0 at the end of the first quarter. Huge offensive performance. But there wasn't that all-around effort. And, of course, he said not playing week 1, a full game week 1, that had a lot to do with it. You threw for 169 yards, but the big one was the 4 touchdowns in this game, against the win over Stroudsburg. And at the time, it was tying the school record for touchdown passes in a single game, which was held by Shane Stafford and Tony Sapolo. And, obviously, you would go on later to break that record. Then we get to something that has nothing to do with football, but it happened during the season, and everyone points to it being, a huge moment in our nation's history, and it obviously was going to have some impacts down the road. But 9/11 happened in between week 2 and week 3. We saw the major professional leagues, most of them, cancel games. The NFL did so. College football games were moved. Baseball was put on hiatus. And there was talk about what do we do with the high school games? Should we play? And we're not going to get into, obviously, the politics and things like that. But 9/11 happened, and the high school season continued. Do you remember the day of and that week of practice leading up to the Whitehall game, how things were at practice? Did things change, or was it kind of focus on business, try to tune it out, and we'll have to unfortunately deal with that on our personal time?
Yeah, I think everybody was just in shock. I just remember sitting in study hall. I think it happened around 10 o'clock, and I was like, we saw it live because we had the TV on, and it's like, what just happened? So everybody was just distraught, what was going on? Is this a ploy? Like, what really happened? But I think, as a student, you kind of just rely, again, on your parents to tell you, what's going on with our country or whatever. And, as a kid, you don't really listen to politics, but at the same time, we have to move on as a nation, as a student, as a person. And for us, for football, it was just, all right, let's get back at it. This is one thing that we've known, we've played our whole lives with, that we can kind of get our minds away from what's going on in our nation. And that's kind of what we did. Yeah, and there was a great article written by Mike Drago in the paper leading up to the games. It may have run on either Thursday or Friday leading up to games when it was decided that these games were going to go on, at least in Berks County or in games related to Berks County teams. And he just kind of mentioned about football being escapism, a way to get away. You put your frustrations and the disaster aside, and he mentioned was, the people that did this wanted to disrupt your life, and not playing the games is kind of what they wanted, in the football focused, way. Obviously that's not at the top of everyone's mind, but when you talk about what they're trying to do,
canceling and postponing shouldn't have been on the docket, at least at this level, and they made the right call. Mike Drago has a bunch of great articles the week of that, so if you have access to the Red Eagle archives, it's a great place to read up about the sports world surrounding the events of 9/11. So the game would go on for Wilson. We'd travel to Whitehall on September 14th, and the Zephyrs weren't coming off a great year. They were 2-8 in 2000, and they'd already lost once in 2001. But this was a rough game for the Bulldogs. Wilson would lose 39-16, although it was only 12-10 with a few minutes left in the third quarter. Things kind of unraveled at that point. But Coach Cantafio went on the record and attributed the loss to poor weeks of practice. Do you remember the practices leading up to this game, or even in the weeks of the beginning of the season? Could this have been related to the tragedy, or was this just kind of a little bit of high school cockiness getting in the way because you had outscored opponents 49-0, were 2-0, and just you knew that the tradition of Wilson was behind you?
Yeah, I think anytime you're in a winning program and a winning team, I think you steer clear of what could be on the other side, and I think you do get cocky. I think with the players that we did have coming back, we felt like we could pretty much beat anybody, and we didn't have to show up. And as Coach mentioned the week prior against Stroudsburg, we had a great first half, but in the second half we didn't really score or come out and play. So I think that had to drag on the next week against Whitehall, and just had to be something that nipped us in the butt. And luckily, this loss, maybe can get our minds back on track and kind of get away from that complacency.
Well, Wilson's now sitting at 2-1, getting ready to open the league schedule, and things didn't get much better for Wilson at that point. Week 4 and Week 5 would see the opening of league play with Cedar Crest coming to Gursky, and then Wilson traveling to McCaskey. Obviously, Wilson had lost to Cedar Crest the year before. It was their only regular season loss, and now you get to welcome the Falcons to Gursky. With that long winning streak that we mentioned, it had been 7 years since a loss at Gursky. Now we were up to 35 straight victories at home. And Cedar Crest came in and shut out Wilson. Not only did they win, Cedar Crest blanked the Bulldogs 21-0 on September 21st. It's actually the last time Wilson's been shut out to this date of this recording. So, yeah, a lot of interesting stats. I've actually researched that for the Bulldog Hour recently, and when I have to go back past how far Max Preps has their data, because it goes back to, I think, right after you graduated is when they start, like 2004. And when I have to go back past that, I know that it's been a while since something happened. And unfortunately for that, it was the last time a Wilson team was shut out was against Cedar Crest on September 21st of the 2001 season. And at that point in time, looking back 18 years ago now, that game was the first home shutout loss since 1993 against Pottsville. It was the first shutout as Wilson coached for Cantafio. And like we mentioned, the long home winning streak, it was the first home loss for the Bulldogs since September 23rd, 1994. Looking back at the game recap, there were a lot of penalties and drop passes, which led to a lot of missed opportunities. How do you react in a game as a quarterback when you know the receiver should have caught the ball?
I guess it all depends what person it is. I mean, if you can really jump on somebody, I'll jump on him. But if it's a guy that will just crumble and kind of you lose him for the rest of the game, you kind of got to pull him to the side, kind of ease him into it, and just say, I believe in you. Next time the ball comes, you're going to catch it. But still, at the same time, I'm young, so my leadership qualities probably weren't the best as they were at my junior or senior year, but still growing into that. But at the same time, we expect more. And, even for me, I expect more out of myself. If the ball could have been placed a little bit, better for the receiver to make him able to catch it, then that's on me as well. So there's a lot of things that go into it, drop passes or, incompletions.
So at this point now, Wilson's 2-2. Whitehall was surprising but understandable because of the events surrounding it, having to go on the road. There's a lot of background noise for that game. Cedar Crest was disappointing because of everything that ended and everything, that's a footnote in Wilson history, but it was somewhat excusable because of the talent that Cedar Crest also had. We mentioned when we talked about your freshman year, Brandon Kirsch and Jaron Hayes, well, they're both back. They're both going to Purdue and Michigan State, respectively. Those are big guys, too. And for the amount of big players that Wilson had, Cedar Crest just seemed to have the momentum in the series. They had won last year. They came to Gursky, didn't seem phased, and shut out the Bulldogs. But what happened this next week was kind of shocking, I think, to everyone. After starting 2-0, to drop 3 in a row was just like people didn't know what to do. Like the Wilson community had no idea. And even inside the locker room, I'm not sure people exactly knew what was going on because of the expectations coming into the year and the talent that was coming back. Do you look back on the 2001 season and just think that team was incredibly talented, but unfortunately a few of those teams just had a little bit more?
Yeah.
How do you explain some of the troubles that 2001 team had?
Yeah, I think it is all due to some of the leadership too. We had great leadership years before. My freshman year, and then that year. I'm not saying that our seniors weren't great leaders, but I think it was just a more verbal leadership my freshman year than it was my sophomore. I think the sophomore guys really wanted to lead by example rather than speak up. So I think a lot of things needed to be said, but were never said because a lot of guys were quiet and didn't, pose that aspect. But at the same time, it's still disheartening that you drop 3 in a row, wasting, a lot of talent that we do have. And, we put it on us as players, Coaches are still coming up with great game plans. We just need to execute better and kind of get back on track and, pull people aside and what can we do better and really get this thing going again.
Yeah, that third loss is the game at McCaskey on September 28th, 2001. Wilson loses to the Red Tornadoes 38-20, and it was the first 3-game losing streak since October 7th, 1988. Wilson hadn't lost 3 in a row since the 88 season when they lost to Reading, McCaskey, and Boyertown. And at some point, I want to highlight that Boyertown game because it's a really interesting ending as Kerry Collins throws to Todd Bradburn, basically makes like 4 defenders miss and stumbles and falls down right at the goal line as time expires. And Wilson, of course, thinks he scored, and the refs saw it otherwise. So I had never seen it until just recently researching for this sit-down. But it was a controversial 3-game losing streak, but it's on the record as being the last one prior to the 2001 season. And this was the first 3-game losing streak in Contafio's then 22-year career. He had never lost 3 games in a row. So this is kind of a culture shock for everyone. No one kind of knew how to react. But McCaskey had a goal line stand to start the game. I think that kind of set them off and got their blood flowing, and they kind of went on to dominate Wilson throughout, leading 31-7 in the late third quarter. There was a weird play, though, that sparked in my mind as soon as I started to read the recaps, where you threw, I can't remember if it was into the flat or a short pass towards Desmond Boyd, and it was incomplete or dropped, but the refs ruled it a fumble. Do you remember that play?
I can't say I did, but actually, yeah. It's tough. As a high school, you don't get
no
to play,
replay, right?
It's just like all he or she. I was at the Wilson High School basketball game the other night too, and it's just like, geez, this is so bad because you just rely on INC, and it happens in the NFL as well. So
yeah,
you just got to go with the flow, and hopefully you can overcome it through play throughout the game, than relying on the officials.
Yeah, there was a game. That came back as soon as I read it in the article recap. I was like, oh, I do kind of remember that, and I have the film, and obviously I'll be cutting that up to show while I play this audio here. So hopefully people will get to see the play that we're talking about. But I remember being at just a few years ago, I believe it was the fall of 2016 against Central Dauphin. There was a play similar where the receiver didn't catch the ball. It was a pass from Connor Urig to, I can't remember now if it was Brian Wright or someone on the 2016 team, and it was an incomplete pass, and there was no whistle. Central Dauphin picked up the ball and returned it for a touchdown. So it's just like, at the point you're just kind of looking around, that like that John Travolta meme of him just like turning and looking. That's what you're doing on the sideline because you're like, did that really just happen? And apparently that's what it was against McCaskey that fall game where you threw a pass to Desmond and he dropped it or went through his hands and McCaskey just picked it up, no whistle, our ball. It's super weird. You're not saying there was a turning point or anything, but it's just something that stood out. And anytime there's a weird play, I always want to see if you remember it. Yeah, Coach Contafio said after the game, he said, "Our kids showed us something tonight. We're going to have a great second half of the year, and we're going to make life miserable for people down the road." Now, he credited the resiliency of the team. Down 31-7, you fight back to cut it. I think 31-20. McCaskey ended up scoring near the end to make it the final score of 38-20. But despite all the negativity piling on board, 3-game loss, Coach Contafio was actually still very positive. Now, he knew that the odds of making districts had gone out the window. We mentioned only 4 teams make it. Sitting at 2-3, it's not going to happen. But now you're playing for pride. Now you're playing for history, because at this time, Wilson would have been in, around 40 or so seasons consecutively without a losing season. Sitting at 2-3, you got to win 4 of the next 5 games to ensure that continues. And that's what Wilson's now playing for. And it seemed to have worked, and Coach Contafio was very right, because the next few weeks, Wilson goes on a tear, beating Hempfield, Penn Manor, and Manheim Township 3 weeks in a row. At Hempfield, October 5th, winning 31-13. Hosting Penn Manor on October 12th, winning 28-10. And then week 8 going to Manheim Township. Now this one was much closer, but a victory is a victory. Wilson wins 27-24. You had 3 touchdowns, all to Ian Firestone. He had one heck of a game that night. Do you remember the performance and the connection that you and him had at Manheim Township that evening?
Yeah, anytime a guy scores 3 touchdowns, obviously he's doing something right. And I feel like that week we had a mismatch, and we felt like there wasn't a guy out there that could cover Ian, and we were trying to get the ball as much as we could.
Now we come to Reading. Again, being a member of the LL League at the time, you're always going to see them. Once again, it's week 9. Wilson gets to host them now, so Reading's coming to Gursky Stadium and are huge underdogs. The Bulldogs are at home. Wilson's sitting at the time 5-3. If you win this game, Wilson wins this game, you're insured of not having a losing season. And despite being huge underdogs, you and the Bulldogs played really well. Didn't get the win, losing 22-21, but there were moments where Reading thought, oh my gosh, here it goes again, just like last year. Because you and Wilson take the lead 21-15 in the fourth quarter, and Reading's now thinking, can we pull this out? We're favored. We're the better team. We're more talented is what they're thinking. They roll down the field, win or go up 22-21, but you get the ball back. You're driving down the field, and as it's stated in the Reading Eagle article, Andy Lajado comes wide open on I think he said a skinny post or a slant or something like that. But then you get hit by Sam Bryant. Do you remember that play? Is that exactly how Mike Drago wrote it up, where Lajado's wide open and Sam Bryant then just blindsides you?
Yeah, obviously, you can say anybody's wide open, but when you get hit, it doesn't really matter. But I do remember the hit. Sam was a heck of a player. And, he had a free shot on me, I believe. And, could be, a touchdown or it could go either way. But if you don't block anybody or if, maybe I was hot, I don't know. But
yeah,
free hit and he makes a play, then, power to him.
Unfortunately, those Red Eagle articles don't get into blocking patterns and things like that. But he just mentioned, it actually kind of was Contafio's viewpoint as he's relaying it to Mike Drago. And he just says, Contafio's scanning the field, sees Lajado open, is waiting for the ball to be in the air and looks back, and Sam Bryant has taken you out. That's the entire thing. That one elicited a shock and an awe from the crowd, that hit, because that was a big hit. It actually knocked you out of the game for a play or two. Now you were able to come back in. Were you injured after that play, or were you just like, I got to take a moment here?
It was probably just, at that age, probably just wind knocked out of me.
Yeah.
Probably you could, get back up, but that was probably the extent of it.
Wilson drops to 5-4. Now the game against Governor Mifflin means a lot. It always means something in a rivalry like that, but you've got to beat the Mustangs in order to continue the non-losing season streak, which is a huge deal at Wilson. So on November 2nd, you welcome the Mustangs to Gursky, and it's not even a contest. It ends up going the way the beginning of the year started with Stroudsburg winning 41-6 over Mifflin. And this was Wilson's 10th victory in the last 11 games against their crosstown rivals. You went 14 of 24 for 189 yards, another 3 touchdowns. But the night was about senior receiver and cornerback of year, Ian Firestone, who we talked about a lot. He ended up setting a school career receptions record of 134, which I believe was one more than Brett Harbach, and also a school career receiving yardage record of 1,907. And as of now, both of those still stand. So that just kind of goes to speak of the talent that you were playing with throughout those seasons at Wilson with Brett Harbach and then Ian Firestone's loaded receiving core. And yeah, Ian's records that were set that night are still in the Wilson record book. But foreshadowing what was to come in 2002, it was actually junior wide receiver, cornerback, and returner Andy Lajado that was the standout in the Wilson-Mifflin game, as he went on to catch 7 balls from you for 159 yards, and he'd return a kickoff 96 yards for a touchdown, and would have an interception. And there was a lot of praise for Ian after the game, but he actually deflected some of that onto Andy, saying, look out for this kid next year. Obviously, this was the last game for Wilson, for those seniors, and for you in your sophomore year. But Andy Lajado was a name that kind of jumped out at that point, and we're going to hear a lot from him here shortly. So sophomore year, obviously, didn't go exactly as planned. No return to districts, 6-4 season, and a lot of questions. And those questions actually related more to 2002. People were wondering, well, look at the guys that they're losing. They couldn't get it done this year. How are they going to get it done next year? But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about your between sophomore and junior years, the recruiting. Did that really jump up? You mentioned the LSU offer. How did recruiting tick up then following your sophomore year?
Well, I mean, I think daily I would just get pieces of mail from numerous schools. I mean, it could be 30 pieces of mail a day to 50. And back then they didn't have social media, so everything was through letter. You might get a phone call once, here and there, but it was basically through Contafio. The recruiting picked up, a lot of camps again. People saying, do you want to go to camp here? Do you want to go there? And Contafio, obviously running his camps, helped out in the recruiting as well. But we decided to go after the sophomore season to University of Purdue, which at the time was the only quarterback camp in the country. And Drew Brees was just finishing up, I believe, or just left there, and then Kyle Orton was the quarterback. Yep. So they had a tradition there where their quarterbacks were playing really well on a high level. So they developed this quarterback camp, and Contafio thought, well, you know what, why don't we go out there? It's in the Midwest, see if we can pick up some Midwest offers and get some more just visual of you out there performing. So we go out there, and as finishing up as a sophomore, everybody says, all right, well, you're stuck with the sophomore class. Like, you're not allowed to move up to the junior and senior class to compete in. And Coach Contafio at the time was like, no, like, you need to bring this guy up. He knows how to do his drops. He knows 3-step, 5-step. He can throw the ball here and there. And then they finally moved me up to compete against the juniors and seniors. And, luckily enough, that helped me and propelled me because I became the MVP of that camp. And that kind of ignited everything in the Midwest, the Michigans, the, bigger schools out there, Ohio State, Purdue. I mean, at the time, really jumped on board. And then my kind of recruiting just went through the roof. And becoming the MVP at that camp with a lot of good talent for the quarterback position just spiked it. And it's all due to just going to one camp.
Wow, that's amazing to think that, your stock can change that quickly. And obviously, people were looking at you when you're younger because of the prototypical size. That was what they wanted. They were like, we can groom him. And now you're starting to show it with attributes in high school, and that one camp can kind of be a swoon for you. How many D1 offers, major D1 schools, did you end up being offered by?
I think it was close to over 80. So, I mean...
Pretty much, you had your choice.
Yeah, my choice. I mean, from the West Coast to South to North, I mean, Midwest, everywhere.
Was there a school that never offered that you were kind of like, man, I was hoping to, visit or hear from them?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm pretty sure Texas offers, but I don't know if Texas actually did offer because they're so in-state volumed, and, I mean, at that time, they could probably get whoever they wanted from the state of Texas, that they're not worried about a kid from Pennsylvania. So there's some schools like that, but... I think that was really the only one that kind of stands out at this point, that maybe I didn't get an offer from Texas.
2002 season, that summer rolls around. Wilson's lost a lot. There are a lot of key departures. I believe it was 4 offensive linemen, 2 wide receivers, the fullback on offense alone, and then, 2 or 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 2 defensive backs. Like, Wilson is losing players because there were so many seniors that played on that 2001 team. Now, there were returners, obviously, tight end Chris Hartman, who you know very well. Both running backs are back in D. Millard and Desmond Boyd, so that's a huge plus. You lose Ian Firestone, but Andy Lajado returns, but only 1 offensive lineman in Brad Baver. When you talk about that, people will say, well, you had Chad Henne coming back, so you got a great starting ground, but there wasn't a lot surrounded you, a couple skill guys, but only 1 lineman, and that's usually the one that people focus on. When you don't have linemen coming back, that's usually a huge red flag. And conversely, on defense, there were linemen returning, but they had been injured. Chris Sands and Chad Brodsky were huge impact players, even as sophomores. But then as their junior year in 2001, they were both injured. They both ended up having knee injuries and didn't get to play as much, which could have also contributed to the lack of success in 2001. You 1 linebacker coming back and about 2 defensive backs. All in all, you're looking at over half of the starting group is gone. And people will say, and they didn't even have a great year. What's going to happen now? Are we in trouble? Looking at it before we go here game by game, you played on 4 teams. Which was your most successful season? Like, do you look at record-wise, or do you look at, personal statistics? How do you determine what was your best high school year?
I think, all goes, doesn't matter about my statistics. It's all about the wins. And I think, as a junior, with not many returning starters coming back in the season that we eventually have, it was just unbelievable. I knew, I played with these guys growing up, so I always played up. So everybody that was on that team I played with before, and I knew what kind of work ethic they had, what kind of mentality they had, and I knew we still had a chance just because of that. And we put in a lot of work in that off season. I remember we were just always competing in something, and everybody had the right mindset that we're going to prove people wrong, and really showed throughout that season.
Yeah, by record, this was the best high school season of your career that we're going to talk about here in 2002. And it also was a statistical breakout for you. This solidified the recruiting hype. Now, you knew that you were the real deal because of the offers you're getting. The coaching staff and your team knew it as well. But I think some people were looking back at the stats and being like, well, yeah, he's the prototypical size, but what has he been able to do? Which was complete junk if you look back on it. But people, especially anti-Wilson people, get that in the head that you're overrated, and that's obviously not related to you. That can be any Wilson prospect. Just playing at Wilson, they say, gets you, a name. And hey, that's what happens when you play at a program with the tradition of Wilson. Before we talk about the games, there was something that popped up that I had forgotten about but jumped out. The preseason injury with Travis Schmidt. Do you remember that? That was something interesting that came up, and that's one thing that comes up randomly in conversation every few years is when people are talking about you, somehow someone's always like, do you remember when he broke Travis Schmidt's finger? What was it from your vantage point? What happened during that practice?
Yeah, there's numerous things where I felt bad for guys because at that point, I didn't worry about touch. It was just like, how hard can I throw this ball and how accurate can I throw it? So a lot of times I would just see, push my limits and see if I really could get it in there. And I remember Travis Schmidt coming across. It was an in route. And he comes across, and I just fired in there. And he goes up, puts his hands up, about to catch it, and just, boom, hits one of his fingers. I think it was the middle finger, index, one of those. And I think it was a compact dislocation. I remember him just screaming, and then just completely silent because he went into shock because he looked down at his finger, and all of his skin was off. Yeah. And his actual... It had gone behind, behind and just flapping around his wrist. Yeah. And I remember Doc had to come out, and... I was like, oh, jeez, what did I do? Yeah. And, you feel bad, and you're like, man, hopefully it's a quick, easy recovery. But I think later on, I think he only has, a minimal amount usage of his finger. It's not 100%, I know that, just talking to him over the years. But, you feel bad in that instance. That was something that I actually, while I was researching your senior year, his name popped up. He's caught touchdowns from you now. This didn't end his career by any long stretch or long shot, but as soon as his name popped up in the article, I was like, oh, I got to ask him about that because that was something crazy that you're like, I never expected that to happen. I remember talking to
Coach Ernie Wahlberg, who was in his first few years of his career when you were playing at Wilson, and now he's the defensive coordinator for the Bulldogs. I believe he's the first one that got to Travis, and Travis showed him his hand, and he looked down and he only had 4 fingers because the one was tucked behind his hand. And he immediately covered it up, and obviously Doc took care of him, I didn't know that he still didn't have complete health back in that digit, but it didn't hold him back on the football field, because he came back later that year and then got to play with you when you were both when you were a senior as well. So just one of those random things that you remember dating back to the Wilson career overlap here, and that was an interesting practice, to be sure. I'd never heard of that happening, didn't know it could happen, but there's a first time for everything. And as we talk about 2002, I'm going to put it out there. Most people know that I was a member of that team, so there is going to be inherent bias when I ask you questions about some of these opportunities. That's just the way it is. And I don't do it on purpose, but I talk about this with Justin on, before the Bulldog Hour, whenever we're talking about statistics and accomplishments and Wilson history and infighting amongst teams of who's the best ever. And at no point do I ever say that 2002 team is the best team to ever play at Wilson, because I haven't seen all the teams play at Wilson. But I do think that as years go on, that 2002 team gets overlooked at times, until I talked to Coach Doms the other night, and he brought it up by himself that was one of the best teams that he's ever coached. And it always, and we'll get to this in a little bit here, in modern high school football, the 2 teams that are most talked about at Wilson that I've have overheard is 2002 and 2008. I don't know if you're familiar much with the 2008 team, but that was easily the most dominant team of Coach Doms' run, and as obviously how successful Coach Doms has been a head coach there. That 2008 team was on a whole nother level, and I actually have some stat comparisons later, but I just want to get that out there that yes, I was a senior on the 2002 team, so there's a experience here from both of us to be intimately linked to that 02 team as we discuss it here. So if I get a little too excited about it, that's you just have to understand, people listening, that I remember this season quite vividly. Week 1, Wilson Red Lion, again, coming off of a disappointing 2001 season, entering the year. And I remember this happening, and Coach Cantafio talked to the Red and Eagle afterwards to also say that he had gotten emails from Wilson fans saying how disappointed and embarrassed they were to be fans of the program after that 6-4 record.
The Wilson mystique was taken away from last year's team. I want the mystique back, where visiting teams feel they can't win on our home field. Well, 2002 is going to be a different story.
As a kid, as a player, you're just you don't know how to take it. It's kind of something that comes at you, and you're just I'm not really sure what to say. They don't know what we do, what we put in, or things like that. So that was kind of eye-opening, but also kind of solidifies how incredibly important and passionate and the amount of expectations that are put on the Wilson football program. And the team seemed to respond, because that opening game, Wilson won 44-0. It was just a dominant performance on every side, every aspect of the game. The offense gave 501 total yards, and the defense gave up just 75. And that was to a Red Line team that brought back 12 starters and had finished 7-3 the year before. And you went 12 of 18 for 266 yards and a touchdown. And Lajado caught 6 for 191 yards, and that was a Wilson record. It actually still is. It was tied by Josh Smith in 2005, but that 191 yards receiving in a game by Andy Lajado, all coming from you, is still a Wilson record. But Andy and you picked up right where you guys left off in 2001, Week 10, and Lajado actually mentions in the article that I read, he credits the off-season work, which you've already talked about, how much work went in the off-season, the standard stuff, and then the stuff above and beyond, and then the focus and determination that the team had. It was an auspicious start to the season, and unlike how 2001 began, it actually was a true sign of things to come. In Week 2, Wilson went to Dallastown and again put up over 40 points, winning 42-7. You threw for 265 yards, 2 touchdowns, both again going to Andy Lajado. And you set a school record for career touchdown passes of 35 in just the second game of your junior year. Coach Cantafio said, "You've got to find time to come watch this kid play. I've never seen a quarterback better at the stage of his career." And the article actually points out that little known fact, you were also the punter. But no one would know that because during the first 2 games, Wilson didn't punt. You look back at your time at Wilson and everything about playing quarterback jumps out to you, but was your junior year the first time you got to be the punter, or did you do that earlier as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think Harbaugh punted my freshman year and sophomore year. I'm not sure if I punted or not, but I do remember, at least junior and senior year, Coach Doms was our kicking coach as well, who would spend some time, I think it was either on a Wednesday or Thursday, where we would spend 10 minutes on punting. And it was just a cool attribute. I mean, I'm actually a left-footed punter, which probably nobody knows because I'm a right-handed quarterback. But I had fun with it. I mean, there was always times where I felt like I kick a good one, and then I remember the one where I actually kicked backwards, where it was like 5 yards and just getting a look from Kentucky. And I was like, I'm sorry.
What do you want from me?
I'm trying to do my best, but I took it obviously just like I do as a quarterback. I took it serious, and I just wanted to help the team out as much as I could.
So week 3, Wilson welcomes Whitehall to Gursky, and after last year's disappointing loss to them up in the Allentown area, the team was looking forward to playing this game for sure. And much like the first 2 games, Wilson came out on fire, scoring again over 40 points, beating Whitehall 42-13. 42 or more points in 3 straight games. You, in this game against Whitehall, set the Berks County career passing yardage record. Again, only the 3rd game into your junior year. You threw for 175 yards, had a touchdown, and this 3-0 start was great. Set up the showdown to open league play the next week at Cedar Crest. What was pointed out both by the media and especially the coaches and the players knew it. The senior class had never beaten Cedar Crest. They had at least beaten every team that they played, at least once, but they hadn't beaten Cedar Crest yet. And after, the embarrassing loss the year before, the shutout at home, this was one that the team certainly was up for and ready to play. So Wilson goes to Cedar Crest and for the 4th straight week puts up over 40 points. But this time around, it's a shutout. Wilson dominates Cedar Crest 41-0, the second shutout in 4 weeks, and revenge for that 2001 shutout loss. Do you remember that beginning of the season scoring 160-plus points in the first 4 weeks? Could you wrap your head around the offensive performance to that date?
Yeah, I think it was just obviously, like you said, low expectations, but we knew deep down that we had a burning desire to go out there and beat everybody that we played. But Lajado was really coming along. He was a track star, I think, the year before. He made it to states in the 100 and 200 meter. So we knew we had speed, and for some reason, those teams in the beginning of the year kept playing us man coverage and pressing Andy. And for me, it was just like it was the easiest throw to make because he would beat the guy so quick, and I would just have to throw a fade ball. And we had numerous touchdowns on that, and obviously our running backs with Desmond and Dean back there. So we were very balanced at the same time, just not throwing the ball as well.
Yeah, and that would come up. There'll be games where it was all about the air game, you and Lajado primarily, and then there'd be games you'd turn around and it would be Dean and Desmond. So that balance is what led to the offense proficiency your junior year in 2002. And at this point, the non-league wins are great, but sometimes people are like, well, they're usually the easier games anyways. At least at this time, things have changed at Wilson scheduling recently with the way the LL is set up now, but back then, you wanted big schools, but you wanted games that would help you get things right before you entered league play because the LL is really where you went to battle. It was an eye-opening win to shut out Cedar Crest like that after what they had beaten Wilson 2 years in a row. That was, I think, people started to take notice. But they were like, well, you got McCaskey coming down next week. That's when things we'll really know where this Wilson team is.
At 1:45, 75% chance of rain this afternoon, 75% chance of rain tonight with potential heavy thunderstorms.
And it was interesting remembering the McCaskey stuff because, as soon as I read the name, it flashes back to me of the hype surrounding Joel Holler. Like he was the guy. He was everyone was talking about him. McCaskey and the media over there was hyping him up, and how can Wilson stop him, or how can they get around him? And once again, we see weather come into a factor because this game got postponed to Saturday. So instead of playing in the bit cooler evening, had to play in the heat. Now, luckily, it was middle of the year, so it wasn't as bad as the week one game against Harrisburg a few years ago, but playing a Saturday game against McCaskey was a little bit of a throwback because that's when every game against McCaskey used to be played. There was a lot of hype for this game, and fortunately for Wilson, it didn't live up to it because it was another massive destruction of an opponent. Wilson beat McCaskey 37-0. Third shutout in 5 weeks for the defense. Looking back to those first 5 weeks with 3 shutouts and nearly every game scoring over 40 points, the dominance of the team on both sides of the ball was hard to fathom, especially coming off of the year before. And at what point in time did you know that this team was different than the first two you had been on? Because that your freshman team was an incredible team. That was a great team, but the wins were close, especially the non-league wins at the beginning. And then now you turn around and the first 5 weeks, you're scoring over 200 points and barely giving up any. What were the thoughts as a player and one of the leaders on that team to start that way?
I just think I draw it back to our work ethic. I think we busted our butts so hard in the off season, and we just had a different mentality. We competed everything. I mean, I remember us just doing our weightlifting, and we're just doing our maxes out, and everybody's looking over at what everybody else has on the squat bar or the bench bar, and it's just like, no, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to do that more. And obviously Chris Sands was one of the strongest guys on he was our strongest guy on our team, but strongest guy almost in the whole United States, weight class and what he's doing. I mean, he was just unbelievable. And, Brad Baker and the whole offensive line, was strong and just little meatheads, and they were just midget meatheads because they're all maybe 5'8",
right?
If they cross, but I'll give them maybe 5'10", 5'11". But no, we just had a mentality that I thought that was just fun to play around. I think everybody just knew each and every week we were going to win, from our mindset from Contafio to just all across the board.
The winning streak would continue, but the next week 6 against Hempfield at Gursky, would be a little bit different. It wasn't a domination, it wasn't an overwhelming performance. Wilson would win 36-28, again, putting up the points. The defense just didn't have it that night against Hempfield, and every time Wilson would score, Hempfield would answer back. But you threw for 169 yards and another touchdown to Lahada. You had a rushing score. Again, storms pop up the next week 7, canceling Wilson's game Friday night. We couldn't play on Saturday because of Millersville, and apparently high school games don't get played on Sunday, so now Wilson has to go to Penn Manor on Monday. Play a weird Monday night game at Millersville against Penn Manor. Come out with the victory, though, 42-20. You threw for 156 yards, but again, the biggest takeaway was you threw 4 touchdowns, every single one of them to Andy Lahado. So at this point, people really, they're excited and amazed at what you've been able to do as a quarterback, but to have such a connection and chemistry with one wide receiver, we saw you your freshman year toss it around to different receivers, then have a great connection with Ian Firestone last year, but the way you played with Andy Lahado in 2002 was on an entire another level. You actually also had 14 straight completions in that game, which was a Wilson record at the time, and I think still is. I couldn't get confirmation on that one, but 15 of 17 and 4 touchdowns to Andy. How do you explain the connection that you had with Andy that season? What was it that the two of you had? Was it just practice, or how was it that you were able to make this connection?
Yeah, I think I keep relaying back to what we did in the off season, but I think every time we had 7-on-7, everybody was there. There wasn't a lot of guys missing that summer. Going into practice, we felt we got these routes that we're really good at, and like I said prior, a lot of people still didn't believe Andy was that fast, and we played him in man coverage, and they realized after the game that they would get toasted 4 touchdowns.
That was probably a bad decision.
And it's kind of sad that you don't see adjustments from the defensive side playing us, but we took what the defense could give us. Obviously, I had a lot of opportunities being in the system for 3 years to audible and check in and out of plays. So in the passing game, if they gave us access, we could throw a short game. If they came up and pressed, we could throw it deeper. So we had a lot of flexibility in that Contafio gave us.
Week 8, Wilson against Manheim Township. Now this you're playing 5 days after the victory of Penn Manor. You have to host Manheim Township, 2 games in 5 days. Doesn't phase you. Wilson wins 39-3. You had 5 touchdown passes, which set a new Wilson record, which I believe has been tied since then, but still is at the top. All of them to Andy Lajado. All of them. Which is a school record as well. You also had a rushing touchdown, so you contributed 6 touchdowns in the win against Manheim Township. But in 5 days, you threw 9 touchdowns to Andy Lajado. There are some people who don't catch 9 touchdowns in their career, 9 touchdowns on a season, but you had 9 touchdowns with one player in less than a week. It's just fascinating to think about how Andy Lajado and you played during the middle end of that season in 2002. But we find ourselves back to Reading. This is the first trip back since the victory in 2000 in that epic comeback, and everyone was hyping up this game too. That's just the way Wilson Reading was, 15, 20 years ago. Wilson would end up winning 35-6. The score makes it seem like this was, just another typical 2002 Wilson game, putting up points and not giving them up. But again, it was another very odd game that it seems to occur at least once in each of the seasons that you were the quarterback. There was a lot of credit given to the linemen, especially on defense. Then Reading coach Al Walski said, they are stronger than us, no doubt about it, and that kind of reflects on what you've been talking about, the offseason program and the strength of some of the players on that team. It was an incredibly soggy and muddy night, that Wilson Reading game in 2002. And there were some trick plays thrown into book. There was a reverse pass for Reading that ended up scoring a touchdown, but also kind of ended the game for Reading at the same time as Lajado picked a pass off and took it back to the house to give Wilson a 14-6 lead right before halftime. But Reading was in the game and was matched up pretty well. But then there were 2 huge plays that happened with Dean Millard and yourself having a huge touchdown run. Now, people don't give you much credit for being a running quarterback, but in high school, that was very much before RPO. Coach Cantafio would like to put in quarterback read plays, and he'd give you that option. And we didn't see it so much freshman year, a little bit more sophomore year, but junior year you got to unleash it at times. And against Reading that night, you went for an 85-yard touchdown run. Is that the longest touchdown run of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially now, I'm not running anywhere close to that.
Just after your 85-yard touchdown run was right near the end of the third quarter. Early fourth quarter, Dean Millard had a 91-yard touchdown run on the next offensive play, and that made it 28-6, and that kind of sealed it. So 2 huge plays giving Wilson the victory. But the biggest takeaway from this is you didn't have any completions in the second half because there were very little pass attempts. It was soggy and wet, and just things weren't clicking in the passing game. I believe there's another weird passing stat of yours in your senior year, but what does it feel like to not be active in that aspect of your game for an entire half? Like, what do you think as a quarterback? Is it if we're winning, does it matter? Kind of thing. Like, do you get out of rhythm?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously get out of rhythm, but at the same time, if you're winning, hey, let's just go with the flow, and whatever's working, we'll go with it. But as a quarterback, you always want to be involved, but at the same time, if I'm involved in the run game and still have feel like I'm helping out the team as much as we can to win, then I'll do anything.
Well, and that's exactly how it happened with Wilson beating Reading in Week 9. And at Week 10, Wilson travels to Governor Mifflin.
You talk about it, you dream about it. Here it is right now. You're 2 hours away. You're 2 hours away from accomplishing the all-time goal, an undefeated regular season. 10-0, baby. Let's go. 10-0, man. 10-0. Here we go. Win on 3. 1, 2, 3. Win! Let's go, guys.
This is it, fellas. This is it. One more game. We got a perfect season, baby. Perfect season. 10-0.
Hell yeah. We worked our lives
against
for this
Mifflin. This is Mifflin, fellas. I can't say nothing else.
Not a contest again. The defense pitches a shutout, puts up 30-plus points in the first half. Bulldogs win against their rivals 43-0, and that was the night that the no huddle debuted. That's when Coach Cantafio was finally like, I think you got this. Let's see what you can do with it. And all you ended up doing was leading the offense to touchdowns on the first 6 possessions in this no huddle offense. Because of the score, you didn't get to play all that much, but you actually scored more touchdowns on the ground than through the air that night. 89 yards on 12 carries for 2 touchdowns. And Coach Contafio said, Chad Henne is a complete quarterback and can do anything on the football field, whether it's throwing the ball, running, or making the right read. When did Coach Contafio tell you that you were going to pretty much be in control of the offense against Mifflin?
I think I've been bugging him most of the year that, just seeing things and be able to, being a third-year starter that, we're still in the same system. And in high school, there's not a lot of defensive schemes that switch up week in and week out. And if I saw something, I could be able to audible. And I was like, hey, why don't you just let me, call one of these games? And he's always skeptic because he's, type A that wants to, be in charge at all times. But he allowed me to do it, and, it was a lot of fun for me. But at the same time, you ask for it, and then you actually go do it in real life. It's totally different because I caught myself many times like, oh man, am I calling the right play? Do I need to switch this? And you almost second guess yourself. But it was a lot of fun, especially at that age. Would lead me on to, further and further and better myself in college and in the pros as well.
Yeah, it definitely seemed to have worked during that game.
Congratulations on accomplishing the 8th undefeated season. You win, you continue. Go after that dream, man. You can do it. Incredible football season. On behalf of the coaches, congratulations. Yeah, boys. You deserve it. You worked for it. That's part 1 over with. And now we're going to go after the big prize.
Playoffs obviously going to happen because 10-0, undefeated, no losses during the regular season, which can only be, I think Wilson only has 8 or 9 undefeated teams in their history. It's tough to go through a regular season without a loss. Obviously, you're going to enter the district playoffs. You're the number 1 seed. So week 11, again, only 4 teams make it, and one of them is crosstown rival Muhlenberg. They had been getting pretty chippy. There's always a team that wants to unseat Wilson in Berks County. When we were playing, it was Muhlenberg. Then there was a time where it was Exeter and Daniel Boone, and now it's Mifflin and Berks Catholic. But 15, 20 years ago, Muhlenberg was the team that was like, we're better than Wilson, we can prove it. And they got that opportunity in week 11. Muhlenberg goes to Gursky, and there was a lot of controversy surrounding that because I don't know that power ratings were involved for that. I don't remember how they determined which 4 teams got to play, but it ended up being Wilson, Muhlenberg, and Central Dauphin Spring Grove. And Bishop McDevitt got upset, I believe, by Lower Dauphin in week 9 or 10, dropping them to 8-2 and out of the playoffs. And everyone's like, Bishop McDevitt's much better than Muhlenberg. But that's not the way it worked. And of course, Muhlenberg was saying, well, no one thinks we belong here. Let's go out and prove it. And what everyone feared would happen, a Wilson victory in dominant fashion, is exactly what happened. Muhlenberg couldn't hang with the 2002 Wilson team. The Bulldogs winning 42-7. Things started slow and kind of kept Muhlenberg in the game, but then 5 touchdowns on 5 straight possessions, including 3 in just 3.5 minutes. A lot of this related to you and Andy Lajado. You went 11 of 19 for 212 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Mike Drago and the Red and Eagle called Henne to Lajado the best pass and catch combination in Wilson history. So obviously, forward pass at Wilson hadn't had a lot of history leading up to this point, because obviously Gursky was all about, the ground game. So was Slemmer for the most part, though eventually having Kerry Collins there changed that a little bit, but they were still mostly a run-first team. When Contafio came to town, that's when, the spread offense came to Wilson, and you were the first real guy to take advantage of that. No disrespect, obviously, to Tony Sapolo, because he was an amazing quarterback in Contafio's system, but it really opened up when you got there. And what you were able to do with Andy Lajado is still obviously remembered because of all the records you set during the season. And I don't know that anyone, even nearly 20 years later, would say that wasn't the best combination. There have been plenty of quarterbacks and wide receivers over the last 17 years, but You and Lajado still are at the top of the record book. And, I don't know what else to ask you about that because you've kind of already been said. When you throw 9 touchdown passes to someone in the span of 2 games and just what you were able to do. But the chemistry between the two of you was something tough to fathom and has been tougher to top for Wilson.
I'm telling you, it's going to be the greatest challenge we ever had. Coaches, players, everybody. We're now going to get a chance to take on the best football team in the state of Pennsylvania.
So we get to week 12. It's a district championship game, Wilson versus Central Dauphin. Central Dauphin was, despite being number 2 in the district seeding, was actually ranked number 1 in the state by the Patriot News and number 16 in the country by USA Today. And Wilson knew what they were getting into, knew the power of Central Dauphin. They had been the team that delivered one of Wilson's most devastating losses, about 5 years earlier in the district playoffs during the days of, I think it was Jeremy Palm and maybe John Gilmore. Right around that era, it was like 44-0. It was a really disastrous playoff game for Wilson against Central Dauphin. And Wilson and Central Dauphin already had a playoff history, so this was just the next step in that rivalry. It was at Hershey Park with over 15,000 people in attendance, which by far the most people you played in front of at this point in your career. Obviously, that would change 2 years later, but at this point as a high school player, that's a lot of people to watch a high school game. It was an uncharacteristic first half for Wilson. The offense couldn't get anything going and ended up relying on trick plays. Do you remember some of those trick plays that were in the playbook for that game?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. And, I think Contafio was trying to do everything he could just to help us win and really just to throw them off guard. And I think he might have thought they were better than us talent-wise because they had numerous guys actually had Division I scholarships as well. But at the same time, we were pretty good and we proved that. But, we had some trick plays that, were successful and some that were not so much.
Not so successful, yeah. And the defense was being pushed around. Trick plays were hit or miss. And it just wasn't a typical, at least based on the previous 11 games, a typical Wilson first half. He went into halftime down 28-14, and the reason it was 28-14, right before halftime, Jason Cape, I believe, took an interception back to the house, or it could have been worse at that point. The fans are thinking that they don't have it. This team is the number 1 team in the state and a top 25 team in the nation, and that's the way it looked at that point, and even looked that way into the third quarter as Central Dauphin would race out to a 35-14 lead. You mentioned the star power they had, and Arden Bransford, Brent Wise was the big one that really hurt Wilson that evening, and their kicker even was known for having a huge leg. And actually, a play by one of his few misses on the year, may have been his only miss, what contributed to Wilson's incredible comeback that you helped orchestrate on offense. Do you remember back to that game being down and then the sudden things just started to click? Do you remember what sparked that? What led to the the resilient attempt at a comeback?
Yeah, I think we just turned back to our bread and butter. I think what we did all leading up to that game, all season long, we got back on that page, and Coach Contafio realized that, like, all right, that's enough for this. Let's just go back to throwing quick game or throwing deep routes, running the football as well. And just kind of getting the ball in our playmakers' hands.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Wilson ended up doing. Did it really well, and Jason Cape was, again, another spark as he had another interception after Wilson had cut the lead to 35-20. Furious comeback, furious attempt in that fourth quarter to make a game out of it. And, looking back on it, you just know, and it was said then and it says now, if there was another 30 seconds on the clock, even 10 seconds, Wilson's winning that game. It was a point that it was just about time. If the comeback had started a minute earlier, that game ends differently. Wilson ends up losing 35-33. That last touchdown, I believe the touchdown was to Ryan McFadden to make it 35-33. And then because of an earlier missed extra point, I think it was actually blocked, Wilson has to go for 2. They dial up a pass play to Andy Lajado, which we've been talking about, the chemistry you guys had. Do you remember the play as it was designed or called for that 2-point conversion?
I don't remember it.
It was a pass, but I have no idea what was called, if it was a bootleg or, if there was play action involved or what. But it was another one of those kind of like the 2001 play against Reading where Contafio was like, we got it, he could imagine the ball going to Lajado and looks back and you've gotten sacked. No, this one, you make a perfect pass right to Andy, and at the last second, a CD defender tips it and knocks it away from Andy. And that's we get to the 35-33 score. But that wasn't the end, as Sean Smith recovers an onside kick, and you're driving with the offense into Central Dauphin territory with the clock winding down. Thinking back on this, if you can recall, a Wilson sideline thought when you made your second straight completion to Lajado to get to the 38 that there should have been time left on the clock, and yet the refs call it down. Do you remember that at all? Do you think that there should have been some time left on that clock?
Yeah, I mean, always if you're on that side of the thing, you think there should be time left, but I believe at least 1 or 2 seconds should have been taken down, or at least left on the clock, so we could have a chance to either kick it or just throw a last Hail Mary just to see if we can win. But it was a hard-fought game. I mean, everybody realizes if we stuck to the bread and butter throughout the whole game, I think it would have been a no contest. I mean, obviously they scored a lot of points, but I think offensively we could have overturned it and made some more plays than they did.
Yeah, even with a second back on the clock to attempt a field goal, it obviously wasn't a chip shot. It would have been a 55-yarder. Now, Ricky Ziska had made a 47-yarder against McCaskey, and he's proved time and time again that he had the leg for it. Whether it would have happened, who knows, but they didn't get that opportunity. Wilson loses. You had a great statistical game, 21-31 for 232 yards, 3 touchdowns. Central Dauphin would go on to lose against Austin Scott and Parkland the next week, and they would end up beating the state championship by defeating North Penn and then Woodland Hills. I don't recall the Parkland coach's name, but he told Coach Contafio that whoever wins the Wilson Central Dauphin game, he thought would win the state championship. And now Parkland ended up beating them and doing it themselves. And they had an incredible team that you saw in the preseason scrimmage. And Austin Scott was an incredible running back, and they had quite the team that year, that 2002 team. But a lot of what ifs, and you can't really answer those. But looking back on your high school career, is this the hardest game to look back on and talk about?
Yeah,
Would it be that one?
Yeah, I think because it came down to so close. I mean, you're in the district final. It's the furthest I've been in my career. And, you always just think back. I mean, you were a senior on that team, and you just think about, again, how hard we worked, and I think just how well we bonded together. I mean, everybody got along and supported one another, and you just hate to see, a senior class like that put in so much effort, had great leadership to go out that way. We felt like we deserved more and could have gotten more out of it, but that's life, and I think we all can remember that year, and it's something special to remember and be a part of.
Recruiting spring of 2003, early summer, you had to be finalizing things, getting down to the end because you had wanted to make a decision before you started playing your senior year, right? That day finally came on Thursday, August 7th. And now there had been leaked reports that you had committed to Michigan before your announcement, but you ended up denying them. When did you call and let them know that you were coming? Was it at that press conference? Is that when the final decision was made?
Well, I mean, I actually committed to Penn State probably late in my sophomore year. Contacted Joe Paterno and said that I was going there. I felt like that was the place that I wanted to go to. Felt really comfortable about it. Staying home. Penn State at the time was not very good, but felt like we could have had a good recruiting class. There's a lot of talent coming out of Pennsylvania at that time. So going into my junior year, I meet Scott Leffler, who's the quarterback coach at the University of Michigan. Went out there for a junior day just to see, keep my options still open and kind of clear, and realized that he was the guy that was going to really get me better and kind of move me forward and have the best interests in me at the time. And so came down to it, I was like, all right, I narrowed it down to Penn State, Michigan, Georgia, Tennessee, and University of Miami. Even though Penn State was still on that table, where I was like, all right, I'm not sure. I think this is where I want to go, but I'm, never signed anything, obviously. Realized that Michigan was the team, and let them know right before that press conference. I mean, it was like literally
right before,
half an hour,
yeah,
before I set out to say that I was going to the University of Michigan, and I was blessed enough to have all those offers and all those coaches come to recruit me, but at the same time, I felt this was the best interest in me.
that pretty much answered all the questions I had about the recruiting leading up to that. You mentioned the other teams that were in the running. It seemed that Michigan obviously ended up being number one. Penn State was there right behind, as you were kind of like a soft commitment to them leading up to part of that process. Where did the other teams slot in? Like, did you have a 3-4-5, or was just kind of Michigan and everyone else?
Yeah, I think Miami was 3, and
Okay.
then it was probably Georgia and Tennessee. I had a great relationship with actually Coach Rick at the time, and he was at, I believe, Florida State or something prior where I went to a camp there. But he was a great coach and felt very comfortable with him. And Larry Coker and Warner, I think at the time, was the offensive coordinator, who was up in Berks County a lot, coming to recruit me. Took a visit down to Miami as well. But in the end, felt like this was the best decision. Not too far away from home, 8-hour drive, and they definitely had a great team coming back and in the future.
We could probably fill an entire show talking about Michigan alone, but we're going to stick with Wilson here. So you made the commitment. You're ready to do your senior season. What were the expectations after the 2002 team, both for your personal play and the team? Did you feel like there was enough coming back to make another run? How did you think your senior season would play out?
Well, I mean, we definitely lost a lot of people, a lot of key components. Obviously, Lahada was gone. Both running backs, offensive line was pretty much gone.
Everyone but Tony Setley.
Yeah, so you're looking at that and you're like, man, this could be deja vu of what happened from 2001 to 2002. No expectations, not really, just pretty much me coming back. But, these are the guys, again, that I grew up with, played with, and felt, tight bond with. And still good expectations. We can overcome a lot of things and really have a great senior year.
The Red and Eagle season preview made it Henne versus Bryant all summer long. That was the big thing. You both being seniors, this being your last go-round in Berks County football. And obviously that matchup wouldn't happen until week 9. But that was the big deal. The summer of 2003 was Wilson Reading and Henne versus Bryant. But there's 8 games before that. So in week 1, you got to travel to Red Lion, had dismantled Red Lion the last 2 years. Get to play them again, come out on top, 22-10. Much different game than the year before when it was 44-0. And Red Lion actually gave you a little bit of help along the way with 2 red zone turnovers. And they had their own controversial fumble at the goal line that Wilson was on the correct side of that controversy this time, recovering that. Defense struggled against the run, I think, which was a little bit surprising with some of the guys that were back. And that's a theme that would unfortunately continue during your senior year. But you had a strong game on the ground. This is where you got to unleash your legs again against Red Lion, 113 yards and a touchdown. But a win is a win, 22-10 over Red Lion in week 1. Week 2, you hosted Dallastown, and that was more of the same. Again, not even close. Dallastown wasn't even in the same league. You and Wilson destroyed them 49-7, and again, complete domination. You threw for over 230 yards and 4 touchdowns, and once again, you were able to score on the ground. The final game of the non-league slate senior season was at Spring Grove, and now that name should sound familiar because they were one of the Final 4 in the District 3 playoffs the year before. Not a team with a lot of history, at least not known in these parts, but you have to go to their stadium and take on Spring Grove, who had actually pushed Central Dauphin to the limit the year before. Wilson loses by 2 in the championship. Well, Spring Grove lost by 2 in the semifinal to that same Central Dauphin team. So these were no pushover. This was a strong team that you went to play. And Wilson came out on top, 27-19. You guys were actually losing in the third quarter, 13-12. And it was a shift to the running game that helped lead to the win. They say the passing game wasn't working that night, but you did have 3 touchdowns to James Giositz, who reluctantly during the season leading up to shifted from wide receiver to tight end. He was a big body that you got to throw to, and obviously you've thrown to Andy Rowland and Chris Hartman weren't small either, but Jim Giositz, man, he really came on when he moved to tight end for you to give you another weapon on offense during your senior year. So looking back at those non-league games, did anything stand out in those first 3 weeks of your senior year?
I mean, I definitely think we had, not that we had issues, but it was tougher than the year before where it came into those games. I mean, we really had to work at it because we weren't as talented as the year before. But at the same time, we had to be very precise in what we were doing in the passing game and the running game just to overcome the talent-wise. But again, we still had great game plans and felt, we're still superior, and, our expectations were still high.
Well, those expectations were met the next week. In week 4, you got to host Cedar Crest, which was the 600th game in Wilson football history. And once again, like the year before, a big shutout at Cedar Crest. This time, Wilson shuts out Cedar Crest at home, 54-0. It was at the time the largest margin of victory in school history, and it actually pushed the Wilson's regular season winning streak to 15 games, dating back to the win against Mifflin at the end of 2001. You went 28 of 20 for 270 yards, which was a new school record, and 4 touchdowns and another rushing touchdown, which was statistically your best game of the year. And in that process against Cedar Crest, you became the top passer in District 3 history and moved into the top 10 in Pennsylvania career passing. You talk a lot about Wilson records. I've thrown a lot at you. What does it mean to you when you start talking about the bigger picture of District 3 and through that the entire state? What does it mean to you to hold records that aren't just so localized but across the entire state?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of great players that came out of the state of Pennsylvania, especially in our district, and to be, mentioned with a lot of those names and to be at the top at, one point is definitely, humbling and, exciting for a young kid. And I think all it comes back to, again, and, it's just not one-man show. There's a lot of, people that helped me throughout the years, coaches, players, and they're more deserving than just myself.
Now, that huge victory against Cedar Crest, that met, expectations or what Wilson kind of expected entering the year, improving to 4-0 now and a dominating win over a league opponent. That set up a huge showdown at McCaskey the next week. Unfortunately, Wilson would lose 31-14, with McCaskey being up 21-0 at half and 24-0 through the middle of the fourth quarter. And once again, it seemed that the skill positions at McCaskey just overpowered Wilson. It was a tough game for you and the Bulldogs that night. You went 21 of 41 for 177 yards, and that actually matched a single game completion record and record for attempts at Wilson for you. Do you remember that game? How that game went? How things unfolded? How you felt during the game?
Yeah, they were just running all over us. Like you said, they had better skill positions all across the board. Even their quarterback was pretty good at the time, and we just couldn't match their intensity. We just didn't match up well against them, and I think didn't help that we played poorly too. We didn't play our best game at that point. And again, I think complacency was, and just cockiness was really rolling in. That hey, we're 4-0. It's just going to be the same thing as last year. But we get overtook, and it just happens like that.
Yeah, the first loss of the season was attributed to the McCaskey skill players. They locked down your 2 big receivers in Jason Cape and Sean Smith. Now, you had a lot of chemistry and connections with Geosits, but that was all that the Wilson offense was able to get going. Wilson isn't a stranger to missed calls. We talked about a few already tonight, whether it's a penalty or a turnover or something to do with the clock. In 1998, a fumble by Manheim Central's Jeff Smoker wasn't called, and it played a part in the Barons' victory, which cost Wilson a Lancaster-led league Section 2 crown. Why do I bring this up? Well, because in week 6 of your senior year, you guys went to Hempfield and ended up losing 27-24, second straight loss. Now the chance for making the playoffs were starting to be slim, especially because you had to play Reading yet. The controversy came up near halftime when Hempfield quarterback Austin Hinkle fumbled inside the 5. The ball was actually at the 1. He stepped back, looked to hand it off, but he started to slip, and as he was slipping and falling, the ball comes out. Matt McCaskey recovered the ball. Wilson had it. You're able to go into halftime with a lead, and then the refs say, no, he was down. The way Cantafio makes it sound is there was no way he was down. Obviously, with Wilson defense on the field, you're on the sideline talking to Cantafio, Wilson offensive coaches. Did you see this fumble? Do you recall it?
I don't recall.
You don't recall it. I wasn't sure if you'd be like, yeah, it wasn't a fumble. Kind of one of those deals. Like, I was there, it didn't happen. So the Cantafio in the news articles definitely makes it say, like, there's no way. He basically says anyone else would say it was a fumble. but refs didn't see it that way. They got the ball, scored a touchdown, took the lead at halftime, and Wilson offense and defense couldn't hold out and overcome the victory, but it was a furious comeback attempt. They actually had gone up, I believe, 27-12, and you directed 2 long scoring drives to cut it to 27-24, but again, time ran out, and Coach Cantafio said, hey, we were beating some areas, but the biggest issue was that non-call before half. And it's tough to say that is the reason you lost the game, but it was highly implied that was one of the big things. The other standout from that game was that the defense didn't have Jason Cape. He was out for that game, allowing Austin Hinkle and the Black Knights to throw all over the secondary, and also missing Tony Quarantoto at end because of an injury. So 2 big defensive pieces. Maybe the 2 of your best players on defense missed the game, and that Week 6 game would end up haunting Wilson for the rest of the year. You threw for 245 yards and 2 touchdowns, but just not enough, and controversy all over for that Week 6 game. Your senior season, you'd rally with the Wilson teammates and win the next 2 weeks, beating Penn Manor, where you'd throw for 388 yards. And that might have been 288. I might have written that wrong. I'm not sure. But it was a lot of yardage. I believe you set a new record. 3 touchdowns. It was a bit of a slow start and some inconsistent defense, but you eventually had great offense and special teams. I believe Mr. Sear was announcing and said that Matt Bonsall had set a single-game record for most extra points made. He made 8 that night, beating Penn Manor 56-27. You go to Township the next week, winning 22-3. This is one of those statistical anomalies that I mentioned earlier that seems to happen once a year. Just like the weather, something always happened with your statistics. And this was a great win against a solid team on the road. There was a ton of rain and mud. You only threw 3 passes the whole night, and only one of them was complete for 15 yards. If someone would say, well, you're a quarterback at Wilson, that you're only going to throw 3 passes for 15 yards, well, Wilson's going to lose, right? No way is Wilson going to win. Well, junior running back Chaz Logan ran 33 times for 206 yards and a touchdown. But that set up a showdown with Reading next week, with the playoffs riding on that game. You got to host Reading your senior season. Do you remember the expectations and the prep heading into that showdown in Week 9 your senior year?
Yeah, I mean, just like you mentioned prior, me against James Bryan at the time earlier in the season, but 2 of the better Pennsylvania players in the state. James, I think, committed to University of Miami, and me obviously going to Michigan, but they made it a 1-2 punch, and obviously there's a lot more in football that goes into just 2 people. But again, rivalry's high, everybody's excited. Another opportunity for us to kind of get back at it. Great win the week prior, but still, we kind of need to get this win in and make ourselves feel good about the season that is going on.
Over 7,000 people were in attendance at Gursky Stadium for that game, but things did not go the way you and your teammates wanted to. This always stands out to me. The headline that just jumps out from the Reading Eagle, the "Oh, what a night," and James Bryant hugging his teammates. It was nothing went right for you guys. Like, it was just one of those games where you couldn't do anything. It just wasn't your night. Reading ended up giving Wilson, one of the worst losses in program history. And you already mentioned James Bryant was the guy. He scored 3 touchdowns. He had just these pounding hits against you and the running backs. Just weren't able to account for him, get things done. It was just a tough night all around. It kind of epitomized the season. Just there were times when things went the wrong way, they went the wrong way fast, and it was tough to overcome them. And the Wilson Reading game in 2003 was one of those. Actually, reading back over the box score and the articles about it, it didn't. 44-2 is not. It's hard to slice that and make it pretty in any fashion. But the more you read about it, it was big plays. There were big plays spurred by James Bryant. Either he did them or he helped lead to them. And it's amazing how one person can take a game and turn it around. But that's happened for and against Wilson, and on this night, unfortunately, was against. What was the reaction post game? Your teammates and coaches, what did they say after the 44-2 loss to Reading?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, obviously, you get your butt whooped that bad. What else can you say? I mean, you're already beat down. There's not much that you can add on top of that to make you feel any better or any worse. But we knew, hey, we just got to bounce back. We have one game left, and give it to Reading. Hopefully, they go on and win the district or states, because they had a heck of a team, heck of a senior class, and they just had our number that year.
So week 10, you get to host the rival Governor Mifflin at Gursky.
You will never play football again on this field. You will never wear that uniform again.
Let's go, team on three. 1, 2, 3.
Henne, son of Sheldon and Sue Henne of
And you guys definitely seemed that you wanted to forget the week before, because you ended up putting 60 points on the board, winning 60-13. It was actually the final game in the Lancaster Lepne League for Governor Mifflin. They were moving to the Berks IC the next season, and it was your final high school game. But you didn't even get to play the whole game because of the destruction that happened, 35-0 in early second quarter. Everything went right for you, but that unfortunately meant you didn't get to play the whole game. What was it like knowing that was the final time you were going to step on Gursky and play with those kids that you grew up, spent your entire football life playing with them, and now it was over?
Obviously, just thinking back on all the memories that I had at Gursky or just in my career at Wilson, kind of just replayed through my mind that whole game and just kind of taking it in one step at a time. But I think the most thing that the thing that I do remember most is that just thinking about my classmates never getting to play or playing at Gursky again, that really hurt me personally, because I knew I was moving on to bigger and better things. But some of these guys, this is the last opportunity to play on this field, and kids that I grew up with. So I think it was mixed emotions. I mean, I knew that my career is coming to an end tonight, and it was a tough way to go out. But I just felt for more of my teammates than just myself personally.
You ended up passing for 123 yards against Mifflin, 2 touchdowns, and the yardage total was able to get you over 7,000 yards in your career, which you were only at the time the third Pennsylvania player to ever do so across the state, and you finished with a still Wilson record, 74 career passing touchdowns, and no one's come close since. I think maybe high 30s or 40s for a few of them, and we've had people maybe break single-season records, but some of your career records are going to be up there for a long time, because you don't get people who start for 4 years in high school. So that kind of puts a bow on your career. Just a few final questions here before we finish up. You play with a ton of kids in their 4 years at Wilson, D1 prospects, incredible talent. Who was the best one that you played with? If you can single someone out who you're like, he was the best player. Yeah, offense, defense, doesn't matter. Who's when you played, who was that guy?
Yeah, I think you have to go back. We've talked about him a lot in 2002, Andy Lajado. Our connection just on the football field, we were track teammates as well. We ran the 4x1, and his success on the track as well was unbelievable. But, he was just one of those guys. He was real skinny, kind of scrawny guy, but he made it work, and he had tremendous speed and just a great attitude. He never once, complained that he wasn't getting the ball because we were running the ball that game. But he was something special for sure.
I know Coach Contafio had a huge impact on your life, but if you take him out of the equation, who was the next coach that had the biggest impact on you at Wilson? Who taught you the most? Who was the one you looked up to the most outside of Coach Contafio?
Yeah, there's numerous people. It's hard to list one, but obviously Doug Doms was part of it. He coached me in track as well, and football, so he had a big impact as well. Ernie Wahlberg was always a great support and staff for me, because he would always give me crap when he was the defensive coordinator and try to, pick me apart in practice and, challenge me for sure, and always screaming and trying to get the best at everybody, which was, great aspect as well. But even early on, I think Carl Dragonet was great. Anton Frunzler, all those guys were just, you can't just name one. I think they all had an impact on my career and where it's ended up.
Now, let's quickly focus on one aspect of your career at Wilson. It was the student part. Who was your favorite teacher at Wilson when you were in high school? Who was the guy that, maybe made the biggest impact on you educationally?
Yeah, I would just say Mr. Noyes was great. He was my pre-calc teacher my senior year, I think. He was tremendous. I draw back to, a lot of teachers. Magala, I mean, he was my homeroom teacher for a little bit, and then he retired. He was awesome. But, I mean, every teacher plays a role in every student or person's life, and, they always have memorable aspects that, keep coming back to you. But I think I've been blessed enough for coaches, teachers, that they've all done a great job.
Obviously, being from West Lawn, graduating from Wilson, this area is very familiar with the Wilson pedigree and even portions of this state. But once you got into, nationally and recruiting and playing at Michigan and now in the pros, if someone asks you or you bring up that you went to Wilson, do people have any idea what you're talking about? Like, do people know Wilson throughout your career? Had they heard about the school?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, there's some people, if you're in Pennsylvania, you probably would know about it. But even, I mean, a lot of teams, like playing with Paul Postlesny, went to Hope High School, right outside Aliquippa. He was in a small school, so he didn't know about Wilson. I think he was like 2A or 3A, and we were at the time 4A. So, but I think around this area in Berks County and right outside of Berks County, it's very well known. I think just the effort and the kids that you get out of this school district is tremendous, just because I think we're just step above because we have the mindset, the work ethic to put into it, and you get really good young men and young women out of it, and it's just a great area to raise a family.
What is your reaction to the manufactured controversy surrounding Wilson and recruiting, especially when it relates to people thinking that Wilson somehow recruited you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we kind of should be able to set that and put it in stone right now. I mean, I came in third grade, so to say you're going to recruit a third grader, that's kind of, obnoxious. But nowadays, I mean, I feel like every school does. I mean, no matter what, I mean, whether your parents are willing to move you into a school district that's going to better you as a student or an athlete, they're putting you in the best position, and that's a parent's choice. But I feel like every school is out there trying to pull kids left and right, and it's very competitive, which is sad because it's only high school sports or high school education. But at the same time, everybody wants the best for their kids. And I mean, I don't know what else to say more about Wilson. I mean, it's given me great opportunities in life that you couldn't get anywhere else. And proud of our school, proud of people that have come out of it. And I think it's the best, but obviously I'm biased. And to say we recruit and somebody else doesn't, I think that's a bunch of crap. Because everybody wants the best students and athletes.
I mean, this discussion is sparked by an article that was put up a few months ago about, Wilson being one of the schools that once, separate private in the playoffs and whatnot. And that immediately somehow turned into Wilson versus Berks Catholic. And then you had a lot of people throwing accusations at Wilson for recruiting. Basically, name any big player at Wilson and someone will say, oh, well, they recruited them. And it always focused with Kerry Collins is the first one that comes up. But then people would jump in and start talking about how we recruited you. And that makes me laugh because I'm familiar with the situation. And then I laugh even more when your mom jumps in and is like, yeah, we moved in third grade. Like, he wasn't recruited. But you still have people that insist, no, you were recruited. It's laughable. But I always say public schools have to deal with boundaries. You must live there. If a family is going to uproot themselves to move into that district, that's their prerogative. More power to them. And also, that's not a recruiting thing. Recruiting is leaving one boundary to go to another and, have no repercussions.
Which technically, I mean, Catholic schools, I mean, I lived in Florida for 10 years, and obviously most of them are Catholic schools. And so people drive 40 minutes and can go to that Catholic school. They can pick whatever school they want. So for us, I mean, as a public school, you actually have to physically live in that school district. Yeah. And, it's tough to say that.
It always gave me a laugh because if a family is willing to buy a house in a district so their kid can attend a school, if they can do that, that's awesome. And it just always made me laugh when your name comes in that conversation because it's complete crap. All right, last thing. We talked a lot today about your entire career at Wilson. If you could sum up your 4 years with the program and the school, and what did Wilson and the program mean to you? You kind of touched on it already, but it was, a big part of your life and helped springboard to you where you are today. What does Wilson football mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just Wilson in general. I mean, it's hardworking people that come out of here. We're a very good school, but we have values that are still instilled upon me, and I think I'm raising my kids here. I built a house here because of the way teachers bring up, the way coaches bring up students here. I mean, I know life has changed in generations, but if you raise them the way you want to be treated and respect people, I think you'll get the best out of them. And I think that's what Wilson has done for me. That they treated me as an individual. They never treated anybody more special than anybody else. You still had to put the work in, and good results will come if you do put the work in.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time, Chad. Hopefully everyone enjoyed hearing your Wilson football story, and there'll be more to come, and we look forward to seeing you playing on Sundays again this fall.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for watching the first episode of my Wilson football story featuring Chad Henne. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And I know a few of you stuck around the entire time to watch the entire show, which is amazing. I didn't expect that. And a lot of people jumped in and out. And if they want to catch up again, you can watch the full episode soon. It'll be available on YouTube. I'll post a link on our social media accounts. And you can always go back and watch this Facebook one, but I will be reworking the audio to make it a little bit more even, especially bringing up Chad's a little bit more. Unfortunately, that was the last thing that I ran out of time to do before broadcasting this evening. So, again, thanks for everyone for watching, and thanks once again to Chad and his entire family for all their help. And we hope you enjoyed, and I'm open for suggestions for the next profile. It won't probably be as long or as in-depth, especially as we go back in the decades through Wilson history, due to the lack of those season highlight films were an incredible addition to this, and unfortunately there's only a handful of them available. Thankfully they happened during the time when both Chad and I were playing, so it's nice to have those on hand, but there's plenty of you guys out there that deserve to have your playing career showcased, and I'd love to hear from you, and let's set up a time to sit down and talk, and maybe you can be the next feature. Again, you can follow us, like us on all the social media platforms, especially Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And always check out bulldoghour.com for more. And in about a month, Justin and I will be back with episode 2 of the Bulldog Hour's 5th season. But until then, have a good evening, and we'll see you again real soon.